Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
After the 27th hallway, Brandon finally saw the light at the end of the tunnel, metaphorically. Clank dash. Shutting the door behind him, he turned his gaze and thoroughly scanned the next room. As soon as he did that, what met his line of sight were two visible doors. So which one leads to the artifact vault? On the door to his right, he could see light shimmering from under the doorway, while on the door to his left was nothing but pitch black. He pondered for a while, trying to decide which door to enter first. The dark room should be the artifact vault, right? After all, the Academy couldn't have made it too obvious that it was the room with visible light. Brandon then headed towards the door with no light. Creak! As soon as he lightly opened the door, a shiver ran down his spine as the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. What? Brandon couldn't shake off the feeling of something ominous. As curious as he was, he decided to enter the room. Clank dash. BRR. The room was cold. Way too cold to be normal. He realized the room looked like a jail. Brandon wrapped his arms around himself as he relentlessly shivered. As he continued to scan the room, there was a peculiar jail cell that piqued his curiosity. Or rather, it felt like it was calling out to him. He had to find out. Step, step, step. As he walked toward the jail cell, it was then when a voice called out to him. Come, let me out. The voice was guttural, making Brandon run a shiver down his spine. It was haunting. It's like the voice is standing next to me, yet it wasn't at the same time. He couldn't properly describe it. As he got closer, he could feel his instincts telling him to stop as the temperature continued to drop. But his body said otherwise. The closer he got to the cell, the more the temperature seemed to drop. Step, step, step. When he finally arrived at the cell, what met Brandon's line of sight sent a shiver down his spine. What? Brandon's eyes shot wide open. Step. He took a step back. Is that? He couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was a human with platinum blonde hair and eerily pale skin. Only that, it had horns protruding from its forehead. A wraith? His alarm bells continued to ring. He continued to shiver as his teeth relentlessly chattered from the sheer cold. No, it wasn't the cold. It was because of fear. Brandon was feeling fearful the moment he laid his eyes on the wraith. He had never seen anything like a wraith in his past life. It was the first time he laid his eyes on a being that resembled a human, yet it wasn't human at all. Scanning, he could see two chains that bounded the wraith. Mana suppressors? Chains designed to seal one's mana when bounded. From what Brandon knew in the novel, it was used to bind the major antagonists and wraiths. But a wraith shouldn't appear this early on in the story. It was then when the wraith's guttural voice reached Brandon. Break me free, and you shall be rewarded. The wraith spoke as if he wasn't chained down at all. It exuded confidence, as if it was the one in control of the situation. Brandon wasn't stupid enough to meet its demand. But nonetheless, he had to find out. What reward? Power. Power. It was known that making a pact with a wraith would give a significant boost in power, turning them into a wraithbound. At least, that's what wraithbounds were made to believe. In truth, they would slowly be corrupted until there were no more traces of their former selves. The reason for it was because the wraiths would slowly take over their body. Possession. They would become possessed. Step. Once again, Brandon took a step back. He knew he had to leave. There was no point in staying. But he couldn't. He was afraid. Afraid that the wraith would do something, even if he knew it couldn't. Break me free, and you shall be rewarded. The wraith continued to speak like a broken record. Each word it uttered sent a shiver down Brandon's spine. It was ominous, haunting, dreadful, like the incarnation of death itself. When Brandon turned to scan the cell, his gaze landed on something peculiar on the floor. It was a white mask with blue runic symbols etched onto it. Is that the Mirage mask? But when he turned to look beside the mask, he could see a skull. No, a skeleton. Could that have been a wraithbound? Since the Mirage mask was there, Brandon could only come up with that answer. Step. He took another step back, but there was no room left as he bumped on another jail cell from behind him. It was then when the realization dawned upon Brandon. If he wanted to get the Mirage mask, then he would have to kill the wraith. It was possible. The wraith was chained and its mana was suppressed. It didn't have the power it once had. But could I do it? He's never killed anything or anyone before. It's not human, but the sheer act of killing made him conflicted. It's a being that would soon wreak havoc in this world. The very race that the main cast would soon struggle to fight against in the future. There was no other answer. Brandon straightened his posture and stepped forward, prepared for whatever happened next. TSHHHH. With elemental manipulation, he conjured an ice-shaped javelin in his hand. Step. Trying to enter the cell, he came to an abrupt pause as the entrance was sealed with a thick layer of mana. Mana disruption, until it wasn't. Creak. He stepped inside the room. The wraith locked eyes with him. So this is your answer? Brandon didn't respond, or rather he couldn't. Wraiths were natural charmers. If Brandon continued to conversate with it, there was a chance he would be tempted to agree to a pact. Holding the ice javelin, Brandon's hand shook. He was afraid. Despite the wraith being chained down, unable to do anything, he was still afraid. If he ignored the horns, then the wraith could pass as a human. It's not human, Brandon. Pull it together. The only words he could tell himself. With the ice javelin in his hand, Brandon braced himself. Swoosh, splurt dash. Thrusting it in where the heart would be located, the wraith spat out blood. However, it grinned, as if it didn't just get stabbed in the heart. Interesting. Gah. Brandon continued to thrust the javelin with a cry, not letting the wraith speak any further. Die, 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 die. Back and forth, Brandon relentlessly thrust his spear into the wraith, puncturing grotesque holes all over its body as black blood splattered everywhere. He didn't want to compromise. He had to make sure the wraith was completely dead. The wraith's body had already gone limp, but Brandon continued to puncture it nonetheless. He only stopped when a peculiar interface popped up. You have slain a wraith. Plus 300 EXP. You have leveled up. Stat points. Plus 3. Skill Weaver capacity has increased. You have unlocked the Wind Affinity. Huh. Brandon took deep breaths, giving himself time to recover. His gaze then lingered on the Mirage mask on the floor. Walking towards it, he picked it up and donned it on his face. The white mask covered his entire face as the blue runic marks gradually glowed brighter. He then muttered to himself, System. Name, Brandon Locke. Level 3. EXP, 100/1000. Class, Anomaly. Rectangle, you are an entity that does not belong to this world. An anomaly. Passive. Rectangle Skill Weaver. Rectangle, create any skill possible within the user's capabilities. Rectangle, increase your capacity by +1 per level. Rectangle, total skills, 2 of 3. Skill tab. Stats. Stat points available, 3. Rectangle STR, F. Rectangle MP, F+. Rectangle Def, F. Rectangle AGI, F. Rectangle Int, F+. Rectangle Charm, F. System Shop. System Coins, 100. Quests available, 0. See, come on, ladies. We've got all in night. Pick dash. Felix was seated, trying to get the girls that were about to leave to stay with him. It's getting pretty late. You should go home too, Felix. Yeah, and if you continue drinking, you might not be able to get home. Felix furrowed his brow, standing up and grabbing the wrist of one of the girls. Jay, just a bit and more, and I'm not D-drunk. Pick dash. The girl pulled away, rubbing her wrist. Good night, Felix. Gah, you girls are no fun. Felix waved them off, sitting back down. Scanning the area, there were only a few students left. They're all men, Tisk. He clicked his tongue. It was then when his gaze landed on a familiar student with pale white hair coming from the hallway. His suit was torn, and the sleeves were ripped off. But Felix was too drunk to notice. It's that B bastard. Pick dash. He continued to stare at him. Then the boy looked at the CCTV on the corner for a while, before walking away again. What a weirdo. His gaze then landed on another figure, a waiter coming from the same hallway as well. Several theories lingered in his mind, trying to figure out why the two came out of the same place. Could they each have? Felix was suspicious. From looking at the CCTV to a waiter coming from the same hallway, the boy must have done something. What was his in name again? B. Brandy? Gah, whatever. I just know he's the current student council president's brother. A few distance away, he could see the boy motioning to leave as he opened the door. The waiter followed suit, keeping a fixed distance. There had to be something more. Thus, Felix decided to follow them. Brandon continued to walk around the sidewalk. He didn't feel like going home yet. The street was dark. The only light source were the street lights. Silence enveloped the street. The only sound he could hear were the noise of crickets. Gazing up, Brandon could see light protruding from the tall buildings, a significant distance away. Step. He continued to walk. His thoughts were filled with what just happened in the secret passage. The maze, the mask, the wraith. It was suspicious how the academy had a wraith chained up just below its official venue. The fact that the mask was never in the treasury. Who was the first one in the cell? The wraithbound or the wraith? Or both? Does that mean the headmaster never killed the wraithbound? Was it too strong that all they could do was seal it? This is bad. It meant that the strongest mages and duelists of this era were no match for a full-fledged wraithbound. Since he'd only read up until the 3891th chapter, he didn't know how the story ended. Could humanity have lost? He instantly dismissed his thoughts, but it seemed plausible. He could have just been jumping into conclusions. For all he knew, maybe they kept the wraith and the wraithbound in the cell for a reason, like torturing for information. After all, he was able to kill it easily, only because it was significantly weakened. But for what he knew in the novels, wraiths were loyal to their race. No matter how much they were tortured, they would never give in. There shouldn't have been any reason to keep the wraith locked up. There had to be something more behind it. The headmaster is definitely hiding something. Reality dawned upon Brandon. He realized that a certain time will come when he'll lose his advantage. The advantage of knowing what would happen in the plotline. And if it was going to happen anyway, then there was no point in keeping the storyline intact. If the story had a tragic ending, then could this be the reason why I was brought here? To change the ending. But in the end, it was all speculation. Raven couldn't have lost in the end. But Brandon didn't know that. Brandon became conflicted anyway. Conflicted if he should let the storyline continue to unfold or divert from it. He had only been in the world for 3 days. But he had already experienced a lot. In the end, there was only one answer. If the story was going to have a tragic ending, then I should change it. It was his duty as its reader. There was no point in following the plot anymore. Brandon was grateful that he'd interacted with the main cast this early on. He could involve himself with them without any trouble. As he continued to be lost in his thoughts, he realized that he had already reached the heart of the city. Lights from the buildings around him shimmered the streets. If earlier there were no people around, now the streets bustled with activity. As he continued to walk, it was then when a voice reached out from behind, calling out to him. "Huh, B. Brandy. Huh, wait up." Turning around, what met his line of sight was none other than Felix Osborne, gasping his breath. He seemed to have been running after him as he bent down, holding his knee, while continuing to pant heavily. "Tisk." Brandon clicked his tongue in annoyance, not wanting to entertain Felix at the moment. "Why, you bastard? WV, he got some unfinished business." Hick dash. It seemed like vertigo washed over him as Felix stumbled, holding onto a nearby wall. Then, blur, he puked on the sidewalk. Brandon tilted his head in confusion. What does this bastard want? He continued to stare at Felix, who continued to puke nonstop. Brandon then turned around, his back facing Felix, motioning to walk ahead. "If you're going to continue with whatever it is you're doing, then I'll be on my way." Wait. Brandon paid no heed to Felix as he continued to walk away. "I said wait up, B bastard." Hick dash. Felix grabbed his shoulder. Slapdash. Brandon flicked his hand away as he turned to look at Felix. His eyes were red and his mouth had some lingering puke. Furrowing his brow, Brandon asked, "What do you want?" Like I said, we have some unfinished business." Brandon already knew where this was headed. At this point in the story, Felix wasn't a full-fledged wraithbound yet. "I can beat him." It was then when Felix flicked his head towards a peculiar alleyway, signaling for Brandon to follow. Follow me, and if I refuse, you think I'll let you? Felix's confidence seemed to stem from the fact that he was ranked in the 200s. Huh, lead the way. Brandon let out a heavy sigh as he followed Felix in the alleyway. In the first place, it was convenient. It meant that there would be witnesses for whatever any of them were about to do. And Felix must have thought the same. They continued to walk until they were completely isolated from any witnesses. Felix stopped and turned towards Brandon, who was behind him. If you agree to whatever I demand, then I'll let you get out of this unscathed. Brandon didn't respond as Felix continued. Guess that means a yes. Here's my demand. On June 5th, I want you to call Rachel and tell her to go to this hotel over here. Felix pulled out his phone to show a specific location, most likely the hotel, then continued. Be sure to tell her the correct room number. So you think she'll come just because I called? I'm not sure, but it seems like she trusts you. And if I refuse? I knew you'd say that, which is why I'll give you two choices. Felix lifted his hand and fixed two of his fingers up. With the same plan, either call Rachel or... At Felix's next words, something clicked inside Brandon. Call your sister. Seething rage welled up within Brandon at the mention of his sister. He wasn't particularly close with her, but she treated him well. He could admit that she was the person he could trust the most. After all, even if he wasn't the Brandon Locke that Belle knew, they were now family. And Brandon will always treasure his family. Thus, Brandon decided to kill Felix. Retrieving the Mirage mask from his inventory, Brandon donned it on his face. H, how did you do the foil crash dash? Instantly, a strong gust of wind blew Felix away as he crashed towards the wall. Coop. Felix spat out blood. Suddenly, a single horn protruded from Felix's forehead. It seemed like Felix decided to reveal himself as a wraithbound. But Brandon wasn't intimidated. Felix lifted his hand, trying to conjure up whatever mana he could use. But mana disruption, it was no use. The mana instantly dissipated. What? As Felix tried to get up, Brandon encapsulated his feet in a thick layer of ice. In no way a deviant, but Brandon wasn't done. Brandon strode towards Felix as blue sparks of lightning were left in his trail. Felix's eyes shot wide open as his teeth began to chatter. He messed with the wrong person. T3 elements? That's ridiculous. Spark dash. Blue lightning protruded from Brandon's fingertips, rapidly heading towards Felix. Noticing this, Felix lifted his hand again, trying to defend against it. But once again, nothing happened. How was this possible? AGHH. TSZZ. The spark of lightning struck him, piercing a hole on his shoulder. Fuck, what the hell are you? Swoosh dash. It was then when a blue torrent of flames escaped from Brandon's palm. F4. Bush. Those were the last words that escaped Felix's mouth as he turned into nothing but ashes. There was no point in sparing Felix. He wasn't human anymore. And even if he were, then he had to be the most scum of them all. Brandon couldn't make any compromises. If you're to be conflicted with killing, like what happened with the Wraith, then changing the storyline was out of the question. You have slain a Wraithbound. Plus 100 EXP. The entire time, Brandon stayed silent, keeping a blank expression. Looking up, he could see Alpha from above the building, just watching the scene unfold. Brandon then retrieved his phone and sent him a message. Clean this up. After dropping Raven and Reinhardt off, the three girls continued to converse in the back seat of the car. They had discussed the events that unfolded during the party. Though, it was mostly Claire and Amy who exchanged their thoughts. Still, though, I didn't expect Brandon to provoke that guy. I know, what a surprise, Amy said, responding to Claire. She'd never expected Brandon to act the way he did at the party, though she knew there was something interesting about him. After all, he was the one to have beaten her during combat class. But when she found out his ranking, she realized he might have just been lucky. After spending time with him in Victoria Mall, her initial impression of him wasn't really anything. It was like he was just there. She knew he was the only one in the group she had interacted less with. It's not because she disliked him, but because there were barely any chances to even talk to him. When they would engage in a group conversation, Brandon would just silently observe them. It was as if they were characters and he was their reader. It made Brandon seem distant, which was off-putting to say the least. After continuing to converse with Claire, the driver rolled the window down, abruptly cutting them off. "We're here, Miss Amy." She took a glance outside the window, only to find the condominium she was staying at. "Oh, we are." Click. Amy opened the car door, then turned to look at Claire and Rachel, who was looking at her as well. "Thanks for tonight, Claire, Rachel. I'll be seeing you at the academy tomorrow." "MHM, take care, Amy." "You too, see, Rachel." As Amy stuttered, Claire let out a laugh. "PFTT, it's fine. It's just the three of us. The driver can't hear us." "Right. Thanks for the lift, Claire." "It's my pleasure." Amy once again turned to glance at Rachel, leaning in for a hug. "Stay safe, sis." "You too, Amy." Claire stared at the two sisters who were warmly bidding their farewells with a smile on her face. In truth, Reinhard wasn't Claire's only childhood friend. She also grew up with both Amy and Rachel. Hence, she knew what their relationship actually was. Twin siblings. Rachel being the older one by 5 seconds. Though their features were distinct, especially with their hair color, their dark crimson eyes told a different story. During their childhood, their parents divorced due to issues between the two families, the Ashfields and the Assamis. While Amy was taken into custody by her mother, Samantha Ashfield, Rachel went with her father, Raphael Assami. In turn, the two weren't allowed to reveal their relationship to the public. But regardless, the two stayed in contact, which is why their relationship never drifted. And the only friend they had that knew was Claire. After bidding their farewells, Amy waved at the car that drove off. Amy paused for a moment, pondering again about the events at the party. It was then when she noticed someone familiar on the other side of the street. He had pale, white hair and ice-blue eyes, adorning a suit that was torn. "Is that Brandon?" But what was he doing there? Wasn't he at the party? And why is his suit all torn up? It piqued Amy's curiosity as she continued to stare at Brandon, who seemed to be lost in his thoughts, walking. It was then when another familiar individual was running, making his way behind Brandon. Immediately, Amy furrowed her brows. It was the garbage that tried to hit on her sister. It was then when the realization dawned upon Amy. Trying to puzzle the pieces, she realized why Brandon's suit was torn and why the man had followed Brandon. This is why he shouldn't have stayed at the party. Because the man might have messed up Brandon at the party. She wasn't particularly close with Brandon, but belonging in the same group made them friends. And as his friend, she had to do something about it. As Amy was about to call out for them, she noticed that the man was staggering, leaning on the wall. And, blur, PFTT. The sight of the man puking made Amy laugh. Serves you right. She couldn't hear whatever Brandon and the man were talking about, but it seemed like Brandon decided to walk away. Good. Choose your fights, Brandon. But then the man followed Brandon, grabbing his shoulder. As Amy once again furrowed her brow, the man and Brandon were going towards a dark alleyway. Amy's alarm bells immediately rang. Something bad was about to happen. Brandon was in danger, is all she could think of. She was confident she could beat Felix. After all, she was ranked 4th within the batch of first-year students. But she was curious about what Brandon could do. Just where did his confidence from earlier come from? There had to be something more about him. Something he was hiding. Thus, Amy decided to follow them. Walking across the pedestrian lane, Amy tailed the two. But when she made it inside the alleyway, it was pitch black. And I lost them. But regardless, she beckoned inside. The more she walked, the more she realized she was lost. There was no sign of them anywhere. Just where could they be? It was then when a voice reached her ears. It was the man's voice. She decided to trace the source. But once again, she reached a dead end. But regardless, she could vividly hear the voice. Trying to make out what the man was saying, she could hear him talking about Rachel. This immediately infuriated Amy. Why is the man so obsessed with her sister? While following where the voice was, she'd always end up in a dead end. Tisk, tack, tack. She clicked her tongue as she stomped her feet in frustration. But the man's next words were when Amy finally realized something bad was really about to happen. He was talking about Brandon's sister. At least, that's what she thinks he's talking about. She knew how it felt when someone talks ill about someone's sibling, which is why she could deduce that Brandon wouldn't let it slide. A fight was about to happen. It was then when Amy heard sparks of magic audibly echoing the entire alleyway. The sound was so audible that Amy could trace it closely. She didn't hit dead ends anymore. As she was about to reach them, the sound of magic had stopped. Arriving at the location, she was about to call out to Brandon. Brandash. But Brandon wasn't there anymore. All she could see was a man donning a white mask with blue runic marks etched on it. He turned to glance at her. As soon as he did that, Amy felt a chill down her spine. The man was familiar for some reason, but Amy couldn't pinpoint just who. And for some reason, she felt like it wasn't Brandon. But this doesn't make any sense. Brandon was supposed to be here, but at the same time he wasn't. It was then when a gale of wind lifted the man up, jumping from wall to wall, reaching the top of the building. Who are you? Moriarty. The man's voice was familiar, but at the same time it wasn't. When Amy turned to scan the area, the other man who had followed Brandon wasn't there either. Except there were ashes on the ground. Is that HM? Or was it Brandon? Amy trembled, shuddering in fear at the sight. It was a murder. Amy had never seen anything like it before. The act of killing. Gazing up, she could see the man with the mask looking down at her, and beside him was another figure with blue hair, donning a pair of shades. Who were they? Her hands continued to tremble. She was frozen in place. Afraid that she was next. After all, she was the only witness. And from what she knew from the movies she watched, murderers would silence any witnesses. Moriarty. Just his name itself made Amy's hands tremble. But that voice, it was deep, familiar, but at the same time it wasn't. Like an opposite force was telling her it isn't the same person she thought it was. She had to get away. Anywhere. As far away from them as possible. Swoosh. But to her surprise, the two figures disappeared. Did they spare her? Or would they come back to kill her? Regardless, it seemed like they let Amy off. With trembling hands, Amy retrieved her phone and immediately called the police. So, could you tell us exactly what you saw? After the police arrived at the scene, Amy was called in for questioning. She was seated face to face with the police interrogating her. Like I said, there was a man with a mask. When I arrived, he quickly left the scene. Amy's hands continued to tremble. The image of the man with the mask etched in her memory. According to their reports, there was no evidence left at the scene. It was turning into a cold case this quick. Can you tell us who you think the ashes belong to? I don't know the name, but I know someone who does. Could you call that person for us? Slam dash. In the nick of time, her friends arrived at the station. After dialing the police, she immediately sent an emergency message in the group chat. Despite already being 1 a.m., the message was immediately seen by everyone. Everyone except Brandon Locke. This made Amy even more suspicious, but she didn't want to doubt Brandon yet. Amy, are you okay? The first one to speak up was Rachel, her older twin sister. Rachel immediately approached Amy, who was seated, giving her a hug. Claire followed suit, giving her a hug as well. The two boys, Reinhard and Raven, stayed behind. Crossing his arms, Reinhard turned to look at the police officer. Could you tell us what happened? Sorry, but this case is confidential. I can't reveal too much information. Understood. He relented. The officer was right after all. They were mere students. It was outside of their control. After pulling away from the hug, Amy asked Rachel, "Do you know the name of that man from the party?" "Man? Do you mean Felix?" "That might be him. What's his surname?" "Osborne. Felix Osborne." Immediately, the officers around them widened their eyes, as well as Amy and her friends. Osborne was a familiar name, belonging to one of the top companies in the world. Osborne Corporation, the leading manufacturer of shift porters. "This is bad," one of the officers chimed in. Without a doubt, this news could be big. The murder of the Osborne heir. They concluded that the case would undoubtedly be handed to a higher task force. They were only police officers. The case would most likely be out of their control. After previously evaluating Amy's magic, she was immediately crossed out as a suspect. After all, the man was turned into nothing but ashes, evidence pointing to a mage with the fire affinity. And Amy was a mage of the water affinity. It would be absurd if she was the suspect. But her being a deviant wasn't out of the question. which is why they had to get her information. But their findings then concluded that Amy wasn't a deviant. Tack, tack, dash. Reinhard stomped his feet. His expressions were one of unease. Damn it. Where is Brandon in this time of crisis? At the mention of Brandon's name, the image of Brandon walking inside the alleyway etched in Amy's memory. But not once did she ever mention his name. If she was wrong, then it would only serve to trouble Brandon. She couldn't do that to a friend, regardless if they were close or not. It was then when an officer called out to everyone in the room. He seemed to be checking for surveillance footage that was nearby the scene. Sir, you have to see this. The officer who was tasked to question Amy immediately stood up, running toward the officer that called for him. Amy and Rachel followed him as well, while Reinhard and Raven just stood at the back. When they turned to look, the footage traced back to somewhere near the party's venue. Felix was running, as if chasing for someone, but that someone couldn't be seen in any of the footage. When they switched the channel to the alleyway, the footage stopped there. It was as if the footage was tampered or cut off on purpose. Amy widened her eyes. For some reason, Brandon wasn't in any of the footage. But I definitely saw him, so why did the footage stop just when Brandon was about to be shown? It was too suspicious. Brandon was suspicious. But it seemed like the man who claims to be Moriarty and Brandon weren't the same person. That's what Amy thought. Could Brandon be working for him? Or Brandon was dead. Immediately, Amy stood up and called out to her friends. Guys, has Brandon seen the message? Checking his phone, Raven responded. Nope. A chill ran down Amy's spine. Brandon could be one of the victims as well, or he could be missing. What's this about, Brandon? Do you know something else, miss? One of the police officers asked. No, it's nothing. It's just that our other friend isn't here. She had to redirect it before the officers questioned her again. She couldn't give them a lead that would take them nowhere. Slam dash. The door slammed open once again, revealing another figure, with bright blonde hair and black eyes. It was her mother, Samantha Ashfield. Amy, dear, why are you here? She took a quick glance at Rachel, but immediately returned to Amy. At that gesture, it seemed like Rachel was uncomfortable. It was also her mother after all. Samantha ran towards Amy, giving her a hug. Rachel decided to give them space, keeping a fixed distance. Ma'am, are you her guardian? Yes, I am. Why is my daughter at the police station? The police then took her to a private space, informing her about the events that unfolded. From the crime that took place and her daughter's involvement, they spared no details. Tack, tack, dash. Tapping his feet on the ground, Amy turned to look at the time. 2 a.m. An hour had passed, and it seemed like the case was going nowhere. At the end of it all, Amy was released from questioning. One of the superior officers arrived, informing everyone that the case would most likely be handed to Special Force, a group of elite mages and duelists tasked to handle bigger cases. It was now out of the police's hands. Amy was then led to their car by her mother. She glanced at Rachel, who was about to enter Claire's car, then to her mother. Are you not going to give my sister a lift as well? No, a flat-out refusal. You're still mad that she chose father over you? No, the conversation was going nowhere. Her mother seemed like she didn't want to talk about it. Amy understood and did not go further. With that, they drove off. During the trip, all Amy could think of was the man with the mask. Who was he? What is Brandon's involvement in all of this? Is Brandon even alive? Her question would be answered tomorrow, if Brandon shows up in the academy or not. After everyone left, Raven decided to stay. Looking at all the officers present, he retrieved something from his pocket and lifted it up for everyone to see. The officers quickly scanned the contents of the item. It was familiar to them. No, it wasn't familiar. They already knew what it was. A Special Force officer badge. Please surrender all your documents. Special Force will now be handling this case. All the officers widened their eyes, but eventually agreed, giving him a salute, quickly gathering whatever contents of the case they could find. They couldn't refuse an order from a Special Force officer. While the officers were busy gathering what they could find, Raven retrieved his phone from his pocket. After scrolling through his contacts, he placed his phone near his ear. Ring, 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 click. When the call connected, a woman's voice became audible. Shirley, it's so nice of you to call. Are you going to ask me out on a date? Coo. Raven twitched, furrowing his brow. No, You're too old for me. Also, again with that nickname. Eh, it's pretty cute though and old. I'm only 23, you know. I thought I told you not to call me that. It's ridiculous. You can't help it. After all, you're Sherlock of the Special Force. I'm not even a full-fledged member. Indeed, he wasn't. After surviving an attempt to take his life, his case of attempt was immediately given to Special Force. After finding out there was no foul play, the group decided to take him in, giving him a badge for protection. They sooner realized that the boy they took in had expertise in the field of detective work. His deduction skills were top-notch, even amongst the Special Force. Hence, giving him the title of Sherlock. But it was quite cringe for Raven. But despite his skills, he was weak. Too weak to become a full member. Which is why the group allowed him to be admitted into Astria Academy, paying for all of his expenses. He was a necessary investment. So, what do you need? Come to the address I'm about to send you. I need you to look into this case. Oh, a case that even Sherlock is interested in. Okay, I'll be there. Scanning, the officers froze in their place, wide-eyed, staring at Raven. What? He then redirected his gaze back to his phone. The call was still connected. He was on speaker the whole time. The news of Felix Osborne's death quickly made the headlines. Osborne Corporation announced that they would do all they can to find the suspect. The case was handed to the Special Force, but it was for naught. There were no leads, no evidence. A cold case. In the middle of combat class, Brandon pondered on everything that happened a week ago. He breathed out a heavy sigh. He was glad to have worn the mask before Amy arrived. But to what extent did she see? And it seemed like she did in fact see Brandon enter the alleyway. After Amy dialed the police, she quickly sent an emergency message in the group chat. But since Brandon had passed out, exhausted in his bed, he didn't see the message. While everyone else instantly went to the police station where Amy was being held custody, Brandon was asleep. After those events, it felt like Amy was keeping a fixed distance from Brandon, as if she was suspicious of him. But as long as Brandon doesn't reveal his fire affinity, then the crime wouldn't lead back to him. Thus, Amy's suspicion of him would only be mere speculation. Regardless, he had to clear it up with Amy soon. From a distance, he could feel Amy's sneaking glances at him. Brandon returned her look, but Amy instantly looked away. There was no helping it. She's definitely suspicious of me. But Brandon just shrugged it off. Because of the Mirage mask, Brandon and Moriarty would be a separate entity, and Brandon was counting on that. Which is why he revealed the Moriarty name to Amy. It was then when a figure entered the room. It was the professor. It seemed like the professor from the previous combat class was replaced for unknown reasons. The professor then introduced herself. Good morning, everyone. My name is Evelyn Cessna, and I'll be your combat class professor starting today. Step, step. She continued to strode forward. Her purple hair gently cascaded along her shoulders, just stopping right above her curves. Her cold cyan eyes spoke for her stern demeanor. Evelyn Cessna, the only professor that rivaled Vanessa in terms of looks and power. From behind Brandon, he could see the male students gawking at the sight of Evelyn. After the events of last week, Brandon was already quite immune to the sight of a beautiful woman. He had a lot of things to do, and idly staring at women wasn't one of them. Evelyn then commanded attention with a strict tone. Today's combat class will be a quick session. Firstly, find a pair and make it quick. Glancing around, Brandon found Raven. Raven waved to him, and Brandon followed suit, walking towards him. But when Brandon was making his way, someone quickly pulled him. When he turned to look, he realized it was Amy. Hey, want to work together? Brandon was taken aback. Since Amy was keeping distant from him the entire week, the change in her behavior left Brandon puzzled. But this was an opportunity to clear his name. Sure. He then took a glance at Raven, who wore a look of shock as well. Brandon just shrugged at him as if saying, well, that's that. Since Reinhard wasn't in the same combat class as them, Raven might not have any choices. Hope he find a partner. But he soon remembered that Claire was in the same combat class. And as if on cue, Claire made her way towards Raven. Brandon then turned towards Amy and asked, any reason why you chose me as your partner instead of Claire? As if she already had an answer to the question, Amy responded, I realized we didn't get a chance to get close, despite being in the same friend group. Plus, I don't want to work with Claire. Why is that? You'll find out soon. Okay. Brandon had no idea what Amy was talking about, but he could make a guess, knowing Claire's personality. It seemed like Raven was about to have a hard time. Shifting his gaze on the students around him, it seemed like everyone else had formed a pair. It was then when Evelyn spoke up. Once again, her voice was stern. For today, you'll each be practicing your pair in preparation for next week's session. She instructed clearly for everyone to understand. This is because you'll be fighting other pairs, but that session will be held next week. Each of you will be given a solid week to learn how to coordinate with your partner. At her instructions, everyone turned their gaze towards Raven and Claire. The student ranked first and the student ranked third. They were powerhouse. Realizing this, the students instantly complained. If that's the case, shouldn't there be a balance with each pair? Yeah, you should be the one to choose who partners with who, Mississippi. But of course, there were other students who stayed quiet, probably wanting to see if Raven was really worthy of his rank. And Brandon was one of them. He wanted to see how he could fare with Raven, another person with a system. His system against Raven's system. Excitement welled up within Brandon. But from beside him, Amy had a worried look and spoke. I think I should have paired up with Claire. It seemed like she regretted choosing Brandon as her pair. Brandon dismissed her. Don't worry, we'll win. How are you so sure? Trust me. He was confident. As the novel's longtime reader, Brandon knew everything there was to know about Raven and Claire. From the way they fought to their weaknesses, especially in the later stages of the story. There was no way he thought he could lose. With a serious expression, he turned to glance at Raven, who returned his look. Brandon nodded with a fierce smile on his face, and Raven did the same. A chance to fight the main protagonist of Path to Ascension. Brandon couldn't let the opportunity slip away. At Evelyn's instructions, they were dismissed for the day, but they were given the choice to stay and practice. For now, Brandon and Amy decided to leave. We should hide our abilities for now. Yeah, I agree. Brandon nodded at her words. She was right. If they stayed and showed their cards, they would backfire on them. Since Brandon had barely shown what he could do, then it was advantageous for him. While he knew everything there was to know about Raven and Claire, they didn't know anything about him. Walking side by side with Amy, she turned to glance at him. She was a tad bit shorter than Brandon, so she had to look up. Let's rendezvous and discuss our strategy in a coffee shop. Sure. With combat class being their only lecture for the day, they had all the time to strategize. Tap, tap, tap. Tapping on the table, Brandon asked Amy. So, what's your plan? First, I need to see what you can do. Brandon could see where this was going. She was evaluating him to see if his mana signature had any resemblance to Moriarty. But too bad for Amy. Mirage Mask would instantly tamper his mana signature, as if he was a different person. She couldn't trace it back to him. Also, this is a public place, you know? Ah, that's right. They were in a coffee shop, waiting for their order. Magic was prohibited in public places such as this. If caught, they would immediately be detained. Such are the rules of the city. Sipping from her coffee, Amy spoke up. For now, I'll debrief you on what I know about Claire, and since you're closer to Raven, you can do the same about him. Got it. Amy then told him everything she knew about Claire. Information that Brandon already knew. He just let her words go in his ear and out another. There was no point in listening to whatever Amy knew. After all, Brandon knew more than she did. Not just about Claire, but about everyone else. The power of the novel reader. When Amy finished speaking, her brows furrowed. You didn't listen at all, did you? Huh. How uncooperative. She breathed out a sigh. Don't worry, I heard you loud and clear. He assured her. Okay, I'll believe you. Now it's your turn. What do you know about Raven? Brandon then let out as much information about Raven as he could, omitting some parts that he wasn't supposed to know. In truth, they should watch out for the other pairs as well. But it seemed like Raven and Claire were the main stars for the next combat class session. Raven's signature weapon was a dagger. But at this point in the story, they didn't know it yet. The only thing they knew was that Raven was proficient with the sword, and that he didn't rely on mana. This meant that mana disruption would be useless against Raven. He would be a tough opponent for Brandon, who had relied on the skill a lot. And it was bad enough that he focused most of his stats on intelligence, leaving his physical stats default. He needed to bridge the gap somehow. It was good that he saved a slot for a skill weaver capacity. After he finished debriefing Amy, Brandon stood up. It seems like we're done, so I'll head out now. Wait. Brandon sat back down. Why are you in such a hurry to leave? Why was he in a hurry to leave? Brandon didn't know why. All he knew was that he didn't want Amy to be more suspicious of him. But the sheer act of trying to distance himself from Amy would make him even more suspicious. Realizing this, Brandon decided to stay for a while. It just seems like you're being awkward with me recently. Why? It was because Amy was distancing himself from him the whole week. He already knew why, but he wanted to hear it from her own mouth. I didn't pay any mind to it, but you suddenly grabbed me and asked to be your partner. So I think I have the right to know. Amy couldn't respond. Brandon decided to go further, try to fluster her. Wait, do you perhaps like him? That's ridiculous. She instantly shot him down. Of course she didn't. But Brandon had to get her flustered to get an answer, which is why he continued to tease her. But circumstances say otherwise. What you've been doing gives me the impression that you like me. She kept a distance from him, stole glances, and asked to be her partner. What are you even saying? I don't like why. Brandon leaned forward, using his thumb to wipe away the coffee stain on the side of her lips. Smack dash. Amy twitched and instantly flushed red, slapping his hand away. What are you do? This. Brandon showed his thumb for Amy to see. The same thumb he used to wipe the coffee stain, which was now visible in liquid form. Once again, Amy flushed red. But this time, it was most likely out of embarrassment. She immediately reached out for a napkin and wiped her mouth with it. So, why were you keeping distant with me? Brandon took the opportunity since Amy was still flustered. It was because Rachel said she likes you. Brandon's eyes shot wide open, but quickly fixed his expression. He knew it was a lie. Amy was just trying to get out of his interrogation, pinning the blame on Rachel. But regardless, he played along. Oh, and what does that have to do with you? Were best friends after all, so it wouldn't be weird of me to observe the guy she liked. She had a point. It seemed like Amy didn't want to give in. I wouldn't blame her. Brandon Locke is pretty handsome after all. Brandon Locke, not him. This was where his confidence stems from, the fact that he was playing a character known as Brandon Locke. If he truly wanted to change the plot, then he had to be this bold. And Amy was a great practice for him. The events on that night had changed his outlook. From killing the Wraith to killing Felix, there was no going back. Felix's death would definitely alter the way the storyline would progress. As Brandon was lost in his thoughts, Amy's brows furrowed. How arrogant. So this is the real Brandon Locke. Maybe, but aren't you lucky enough to be the first person I'm being open to? The reason why Brandon was being casual with Amy was so she would let her guard down. To see that Brandon Locke wasn't as suspicious as she thought. I'm really regretting choosing you as a partner. Don't be like that, Amy. Here, you can have my coffee. Brandon offered up his coffee, lifting it up for Amy to take. Amy seemed reluctant, but accepted the gesture anyway. Fine, but don't think I approve of you for Rachel. So she's still going on with that lie. How stubborn. As she tried to sip the coffee, Amy tilted her head, confused. She opened the lid to see what was inside the cup. What? I hate you. The coffee was empty. Tack, tack, tack. Stomping her feet, Amy muttered to herself. Damn arrogant bastard. After the meeting with Brandon, the two decided to go their separate ways. Brandon left ahead of her, and Amy waited for her driver. After assessing Brandon's personality, Amy concluded that he had nothing to do with Felix's death. Was it stupid to judge a person just by one interaction? She didn't know. But for now, Brandon seemed harmless. Except, I can't believe he was actually that bold. To think I thought of him as the silent type. Surprises after surprises. Every day, she learned something new about Brandon Locke. But it feels kind of nice to be the first person he'd let his guard down to. Since Brandon said she was the first, then it meant not even Raven or Reinhard knew about his true personality. Amy never had any friends besides Claire and Rachel. Reinhard doesn't count. All the people who tried to get close to her were only because of her status. They were leeches. But Brandon was different. He didn't care about anyone's standing in society, evident by the way he spoke to her. While everyone else would speak to her formally, Brandon poked fun of her as if she wasn't anyone important. Still, haha, as if my sister would like you. Keep dreaming. She was unsure if Brandon knew she was a witness to the crime, which is why she kept her distance from him, trying to assess if he would act differently. Hence, she told a lie when Brandon interrogated her. But to her assessment, Brandon acted the same. He didn't even spare her any glances the whole week. Frustrated, Amy decided to partner up with him. If Brandon were to hide his involvement in the crime, then Amy had to stick close to him. If he really was involved, then I'll find out the truth eventually. It jumped an entire level, but I didn't pour any stat points into it. It was most likely because of his recent interactions with Amy and Rachel. So that means if I do the action, then the stat would increase. A plausible theory, but something he could test at another time. Retrieving his phone, he dialed a number. Ring, 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 click. Lord Moriarty, what can I do for you? After conversing with Alpha a lot, Brandon had gotten used to Alpha's subservience to him. After their recent operation, Alpha had proven his usefulness to him, which is why he could entrust him with the next task. I need you to protect someone. I don't think I'm strong enough to protect you, Lord Moriarty, but I will not allow anyone to harm Y. Not me, he flatly stated. Since Amy was the only witness, Osborne Company would most likely put all their resources into finding her. Worse, kidnap her. Whatever they plan on doing with her is most likely on the bad side. After all, the Osborne family were Wraith cultists. In truth, they weren't the company that invented the shift porters. They killed the original company's CEO and absorbed the entire company, thus founding Osborne Corporation. After seizing all the rights to the shift porters, they rose to the top of the market. Since Amy was the heir to Ashfield Company, the leading manufacturer for potions, it wouldn't be difficult to find information about her online. In short, Amy was in danger, and she was unaware of it. Calling the police was a mistake. She should have just kept everything to herself. Beep. After informing Alpha, Brandon ended the call. What he needed to do next was to brainstorm, to come up with a skill that could help him win against Raven. He had already tried world-altering skills like time stop, black hole, invincibility, but the system didn't allow it. For time stop, it said that he needed the time affinity. For black hole, he needed the space affinity, and for invincibility, he needed the life affinity. But those options weren't even possible. He had none of those. But it was then when an idea sparked in Brandon's mind. That's it, a brain processing skill, a skill that could enhance his thoughts to the maximum. Not only can he use it to memorize all forms of martial and sword arts in a second, but it could help him come up with plans and schemes. Adding to that, it could significantly help him in academics. No longer will he be a measly ranked 1,890. It was the perfect skill for him. If Brandon was right, and it was in the same branch as mana disruption, then the ability would be correlated to pure mana, something that all mages already had. Seated on the couch in their apartment, Brandon decided. Are you sure? Yes. Initializing Skill Weaver. Downloading data. ETA 1 minute. Skill Weaver successful. Skill tab. Right angle, elemental manipulation. Right angle ice. Right angle lightning. Right angle fire. Right angle wind. Mana disruption. Right angle disrupts mana, causing it to never take shape and scatter. Can only target one specific location. Accelerated cognition. Timer, 10 minutes. Cooldown, 10 hours. Right angle, the user's cognitive functions are turbocharged, enabling them to think and process information at an accelerated rate. Right angle, the user experiences heightened focus and concentration, allowing them to maintain clarity of thought. Right angle, by speeding up neural transmission, the user's reflexes and reaction times are significantly enhanced. The skill was more than he bargained for. After reaching level 3, Skill Weaver had significantly improved in creating skills. This is perfect. He'd expected the skill to have a timer, but what he didn't expect was for it to have a cooldown. A pity, but regardless, Brandon could undoubtedly agree that this was the best skill he had at the moment. After checking the time, he realized that it was still 11 a.m. If I go to a bookstore now and chunk up as much information as I can, then the cool down would be over around 9 p.m. Thus, Brandon decided to go to a nearby bookstore. After finishing her lecture, Rachel decided to go to one of her family's bookstore branches. Growing up, her father and mother had always bickered with one another. They were typically set up in an arranged marriage to help foster each other's businesses. Asami Inc., the largest bookstore chain in the entire world. Ashfield Company, the leading manufacturer of potions. But to the Ashfield family's surprise, her father, Raphael Asami, had never planned on getting his company absorbed. This led to a fallout between the two families, and with the arranged marriage set up, there was no love between her parents. With bickering after bickering, it eventually led to a divorce. In the end, Rachel decided to go with her father, while Amy stayed behind with her mother, Samana Ashfield. By orders of the Ashfield family, Rachel wasn't allowed to bear any relations with the Ashfields. But regardless, she kept in close contact with her twin sister, Amy. Since Rachel was about to enter one of their branches, she decided to don a disguise. She didn't want any of the staff to freak out, alerting other customers. It's already happened before. It was embarrassing. With a pair of shades and a cap, her disguise was foolproof. Entering the bookstore, she headed towards a peculiar section of books. One of the reasons she donned a disguise was because, okay, here we are, the light novel section. She was a closet otaku. Rachel had always loved reading books. But after discovering the light novel genre, she, once was a bookworm, had become a full-fledged otaku. She knew it was an embarrassing hobby, but she couldn't help it. Regardless, she had to put on her typical cold maiden act when she's out in public. But in bookstores, she could be her real self, with a disguise of course. After picking out the books she planned on reading, she immediately checked them out with the cashier. "That'll be 20 silver coins, miss." "Hold on. You look familiar." "Here." She immediately looked down, placing the coins in front of the cashier. "Thank you. Enjoy your purchase." She then walked towards the reading section. From behind her, she could hear the staff murmuring, "I swear I've seen her before. Must have been your imagination." She breathed out a sigh. It was a close call. After entering the reading section, she tried to look for an empty place to sit. While trying to scan the room, it was then when she saw a familiar face. Is that? Pale white hair and blue eyes, and he seemed to be wearing his signature black sweater. It was none other than Brandon Locke, and he seemed to be busy reading a book. Not book, but books. There were 1, 2, 5, 10, 30, 40. He was reading way too many. At the same time, all of the books were spread out open, filling the entire table. From beside him were the other customers, looking at him like he was some weirdo. And aren't his eyes moving way too fast? Was he just skimming? Then what was the point in buying all those books? The bookstore had a no-borrow policy, meaning if you wanted to read a book, you had to buy them. If they wanted to borrow books, then they should opt for a library instead. Her initial impression of Brandon wasn't really anything. The first time he entered the lecture, he was significantly late. But it was the first time Rachel saw someone bold enough to speak to Professor Vanessa, like how he did on that day. Most students would typically be afraid of crossing their professors, in fear of expulsion. Astrea Academy was a school for the elites, after all. Thus, she was curious about him. Was he that strong that he didn't fear expulsion? From what she heard, Brandon had the lightning affinity, and he had great control over it, being the first to shatter the magic orb. He was interesting, to say the least. But when she found out the rank he placed, her interest fell off. Yet for some reason, Brandon didn't seem disheartened, as if he wanted it to happen. For what reason? When he provoked Felix during the party, he didn't seem like the same person who placed really low in the rankings. There was a sense of confidence in the way he spoke that night, as if he was sure he could beat Felix, who placed somewhere in the 200s. She was curious who would win between the two. But Felix died just after the party, the same party they attended. She didn't know if she was relieved or afraid. She hated Felix, but she didn't want him to die. Regardless, she wasn't involved. But could Brandon be? After all, he stayed behind the party. No, it'd be absurd to think so. His eyes may have been cold, and he may have seemed distant compared to the others in the group. But Brandon didn't strike her as the type to openly murder someone. Since Brandon was busy with whatever he was doing, Rachel didn't bother him, finding a different place to sit. As Rachel continued to read her book, an audible laugh reached her ears. A really loud one at that. Ha ha, this is crazy. When she tried to trace the source, she realized it was Brandon, laughing loudly for all to hear. He seemed to have figured something out. With all the books he was simultaneously reading. Was he always this weird? Swoosh slash dash. Swiftly dashing through the halls of the system's dungeon, Raven quickly made work of the goblin archers. After a week, he had finally broken through to the second floor. The dungeon's layout had significantly changed compared to the first floor. If the first floor were narrow corridors, the second floor had spacious hallways. Not only that, but the difficulty had exponentially increased too. It took him a total of 3 weeks to adjust and completely clear the first floor. Now on the second floor, there were trolls and goblins. Swoosh crack! As he dodged the trolls' club, an arrow pierced through the air. But with his speed, he was able to dodge the arrow as well. Tisk! He clicked his tongue in annoyance. It was hard to penetrate through their defense, as the trolls and goblins had cooperated. The troll would act as the main tank and damage dealer, while the goblins would provide support, shooting arrows his way. Despite reaching level 6 and pouring his stats into the strength aptitude, a single strike wasn't enough to kill a troll. Their skin is way too thick. To make things easier, Raven targeted the goblins at the back. Swoosh splurt dash. With 2 daggers, one in each hand, Raven strike down one of the defenseless goblins. Smash! As soon as he did, the troll made his way to him and swung down its club. Ha! Ha! Panting heavily, Raven decided to retreat. It was too much for him at the moment, but he had already done enough. Making his way towards an empty corridor, Raven slumped down on a wall. He then muttered to himself. System. Name, Raven Blackheart. Level 6. EXP. 1, 400/6000. Class, Assassin. Right angle as the one who left it all behind. You have become one with chaos. Passive. Right angle Assassin's Rush. Right angle every step you take. Your speed stats increase by 1 point, maximum 10. Skill tab. Stats. Stat points available. 0. Right angle STR. E+. Right angle MP. F. Right angle Def. F+. Right angle AGI. E+. Right angle Int. F. Right angle Charm. F. System Shop. System Dungeon. System Coins. 0. Quests available. 0. Skill tab. Right angle, Eye of Time. Right angle see the move an individual is about to take in the next second. Adrenaline surge. Right angle temporarily enhances the user's speed, agility, and reflexes. Shadow step. Right angle grants the ability to teleport short distances. Can only teleport to nearby shadows. Vital strike. Right angle identifies and exploits the weak points of enemies, delivering precise and lethal blows to critical areas of their anatomy. Contract expertise. Right angle enhances the user's ability to gather intel, identify targets, and enhance deduction skills. Envenom mind. Timer, 5 minutes. Cooldown, 5 hours. Right angle temporarily enhances the user's mental faculties, boosting their intelligence. Maneuvering through his system, Raven opted for the exit button. Vroom. Instantly, Raven materialized, falling from the ceiling and landing on his bed. Laying on his bed, he covered his eyes with his arm. Then he realized, I have to meet up with Claire today. Removing his arm, he reached out for the phone on the desk, placed on the side of the bed. 2 p.m. What time are we supposed to meet again? It was then he noticed he had several notifications. No, not several. There was 1, 2, 5, 10. 10 notifications, and all from the same person. It was none other than Claire Victoria, his partner for the upcoming combat class session. From Claire Victoria. 1 hour ago. Hey, I'm here, where are you? 57 minutes ago. Bastard. I told you we'd be meeting up at 1 p.m. 54 minutes ago. Where the fuck are you? And it just went on and on. There were several text messages from Special Force as well. But Claire was more important at the moment. Fuck. The image of an angry Claire etched on his mind. Suddenly, he felt chills all over his body, just imagining it. He abruptly got up, changed into cleaner clothes, and instantly left his dormitory room. So, care to explain why you were so late? Claire furrowed her brows, while Raven couldn't respond. Cold sweat started beading, dripping, but it was mostly because he was running to the coffee shop. At least, that's what he thought. Of course, he couldn't tell her that he was risking his life inside a dungeon. Whatever. I understand that we're all busy. Anyway, what do you know about Brandon? He just realized why they were meeting up in the first place. To exchange information about Brandon and Amy. I don't know anything about him. When he thought about it, he realized he knew nothing about Brandon's abilities besides the fact that he was a lightning attributed mage. But at least it was the same for Brandon, who also didn't know anything about him, is what he thought. Okay, understandable. Barely anyone knows anything about him. At least she didn't blame him. I know. We'll work with what we got then. At that, Claire started talking about everything she knew about Amy, from her water affinity to her fighting style. Raven took in every detail. He was now starting to understand why Amy was ranked 4th. She specialized in water magic, but her control was second to none among the first years. And to his surprise, Amy could somehow manipulate the weather as well, to a certain degree. A total prodigy. Suddenly, he felt like their chances of winning had significantly dropped. After Claire debriefed, they decided on who would fight who. Claire would fight Brandon, and Raven would fight Amy. The reason for this was because water was a complete counter to lightning. Since water was a conduit, then the lightning would scatter around it. Just because Claire was a lightning-attributed mage didn't mean she was immune to it. If Amy traps her in a bubble of water, then Claire wouldn't be able to use her lightning. She would electrocute herself, a basic law of nature. It was a good matchup, per se. Both Claire and Brandon were lightning-attributed mages. It would definitely be an interesting fight. But Raven didn't like the plan, though he didn't speak his thoughts out loud. I wanted to fight him. For some reason, he'd always seen Brandon as a rival. It was as if they were polar opposites somehow. He wanted to know who was stronger between them. But in the end, the plan was set in place. He didn't want to disagree with Claire, who had brainstormed and came up with the plan way before he arrived. Though he didn't say it, his expressions told a different story, as Claire seemingly noticed. You want to fight him, don't you? No, your face says otherwise. It's fine. We have a better chance at winning with your plan. Sure, but we still don't know the details of the next combat class session. Who knows? It might be a one-on-one fight, and Miss Evelyn would be the one to decide who fights who. She had a point. Professor Evelyn had never stated the details of the next session. It could be a tournament type, or a simple contest of strength. Who knows? Disrupting their discussion, the coffee arrived via shift porter. Claire immediately grabbed it, sipping on the coffee. You're not going to order? I don't like coffee. Suit yourself. Claire just shrugged. Raven never understood the appeal of coffee, but his friends seemed to enjoy it a lot, especially Rachel. It's too bitter. A sweet tooth, huh? How cute. The time for combat session had finally arrived. Looking at his phone, it was June 17th, 2148. 2 weeks had passed since Brandon's arrival in this world. Looking around, students had already gathered. From what he knew, there were a total of 100 people in his combat class section, meaning a total of 50 pairs. Also, there are new faces. It seemed like there were new classmates in their class, most likely because some had already been expelled. Glancing at his side, Amy stood tense and silent. The two had not exchanged any words since arriving in the room. In front of them was Evelyn Cessna, their professor, standing on the podium. She seemed to be checking a bunch of documents before redirecting her gaze to the students in front of her. I hope you all have practiced enough. Here are the details for today's session. She then reached out towards a white device on the table in front of her, clicking the button. Whoosh! As soon as she did, a blue holographic frame materialized. On her what seemed to be the details for whatever was planned for today. Combat session. Type: Battle Royale. Location: Virtual Simulation Room. Objective. The primary objective of the Battle Royale is to be the last pair standing. Environment. The virtual simulation will feature diverse and dynamic environments, including forests, mountains, ruins, beaches, and tundra. Safe zone and convergence. Throughout the match, a safe zone will periodically shrink. Students caught outside the safe zone will immediately be disqualified. Rules. Smiley face. Due to it being virtual, killing is allowed. All sorts of modes for fighting are allowed, but duelists are advised to bring their signature weapon before entering the pods. Teaming is allowed, but remember, there shall only be one pair left standing. Torturing is not allowed. We know some of you students here are sadists. Hence, if caught, you will be immediately disqualified. Grading system. 1st to 2nd, A. 3rd to 6th, B. 7th to 12th, C. 13th to 22nd, D. 23rd to 50th, F. While the students continued to read the details of the task, Evelyn sternly stated, "I know the placements are ridiculous, but don't worry, an F does not mean an expulsion. You'll only be graded 0. She took a brief pause, walking around, assessing each student, who wore looks of tension in their faces, then continued. The only basis for expulsion will be disqualification. So please try to not get yourself disqualified." She then continued on about how the virtual simulation will take place. In the room they were in, there were 100 white circular pods, each in the shape of a full-grown adult. Once the pod was entered, each student will put on a white helmet called Augment. After wearing, it was advised to keep their minds clear and ease their tension. As soon as they were ready, all they had to do was mutter the words, "Activate link," and the virtual simulation pod would start. It was also advised to have a full belly and hydrated, as the entire session would last for 5 hours. But it was already debriefed in their Astria Academy app the moment they woke up in the morning. After it was all settled, each student entered the pod. Brandon entered a pod that was next to the one Amy entered. Settling inside, Brandon donned the Augment, covering his entire head. Gradually, his mouth parted open to mutter, "Activate link." Vush. Who do you think is going to win? Evelyn then pondered at Vanessa's question. Glancing at the pods around her, one by one, each pod started to glow a bright white. She didn't know how to respond to Vanessa, who was standing right beside her, seated. Evelyn was seated as well, turned the chair around, and glanced at the wide screen in front of her. The screen displayed the entire environment inside the virtual simulation. On it, the students respond with their pair, separated from other pairs. Though the viewing room was in the same place as the virtual simulation area, it was situated at the top, separating the two sections. Changing the channels to see each student's face, none of them were familiar to her. She was a newly appointed professor after all. She didn't know any of the kids in her class. She then turned to Vanessa, who was shoving her fork with pastry in her mouth, and asked, "What about you? Any guesses?" All the professors who were tasked with the first years think it's Raven Blackheart. Who? Haha. Give me the remote. I'll show you what he looks like. Switch, switch, switch. Until the channel stopped to pause at a boy with jet black hair and ocean blue eyes. On both of his hands were daggers. He seemed to already be prepared. Unlike the students, the professors harbored no discrimination towards duelists. Not just the professors, but most adults in the working society. When she first heard of the hierarchy in the academy, Evelyn thought it was stupid. She then turned toward Vanessa again. She seemed to have finished her pastry. But she took another one from her bag, opened it, and nibbled. What a weirdo. But Evelyn smiled. They went way back during their academy days, after all. They were best friends. But to her initial statement, Evelyn was puzzled. If that's what the other professors think, then what did Vanessa think? Thus, she decided to ask, "Do you also think it's Raven Blackheart?" "No," Vanessa stated with no hesitation, as if she was already sure who was going to win. "Then who?" "I'm still unsure about him, but I believe his potential is way more than Raven's." Who is she talking about? Switch, 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 until the channel paused once again. What met Evelyn's line of sight was another boy, with long pale white hair and ice blue eyes. When Evelyn caught sight of him, her eyes shot wide open. From her side, Vanessa let out a laugh. Ha ha ha, do you see it too? Yes. He thinks he's hiding it well, but most of the professors had suspected it already. A possible deviant. Unlike the students, professors who had an expertise in mana could distinguish an individual's mana signature. It was possible to hide it, of course, but it seemed like the boy didn't know how. If a mage with one affinity had their mana signature in the same color as their elements, then a deviant's color was pure white. But of course, not everyone could actually distinguish it. It was only the ones who had meticulously studied mana to the brim. Interesting. What's his name? Brandon Locke. Oh, what rank is he? 1,890th. Was she joking? She had to be. How could a possible deviant ranked so low? Ha ha ha, unfortunately, I'm not joking. I was pretty disappointed too. But still, he has potential. How did he play so low? He was mostly held back by his test score. So he was an idiot. Power means nothing when your brain can't even comprehend with it. Then what was so special about him that even someone like Vanessa could be confident in him winning? She was then snapped out of her thoughts as Vanessa called out to her, pointing at the screen. Look, it's starting. Before Evelyn looked at the screen, her attention lingered elsewhere. Your face. Oh, thanks. There were traces of whipped cream all over her mouth. How unlucky. You can say that again. The two shivered relentlessly. It was cold. Too cold. At the start of the battle royale, Brandon and Amy found themselves in a vast expanse of tundra. Ice sheets were layered on the ground, as the trees around them were draped in a pristine layer of white snow. Even the virtual simulation accurately captured the sheer coldness of a tundra biome. Truly, virtual simulation was a groundbreaking technology. I should be worn a thick coat before entering. Amy shuddered, rubbing her arms with her hands, trying to warm herself up however she can. If Brandon could, he would conjure up flames right at the moment. But he can't. Not when Amy is here. She'd already seen Felix's ashes. The fact that he wasn't known to have the fire affinity was one of his alibis to the crime. Can't you change the weather? No. I can only make it slightly rain. Useless. Amy knitted her brows, still rubbing her arms. You just thought I was useless, didn't you? Staring at her, Brandon shrugged it off. You're imagining it. Amy rolled her eyes at Brandon's response. Scanning the area, for whatever shelter he could find, he could see a cave nearby. Let's head there. He pointed towards the cave with trembling hands. Amy immediately nodded, following him closely. Scrunch, scrunch. Each footstep made a rustling sound as they walked towards the cave, stepping on lumps of foliage. Scrunch, scrunch. Finally, they arrived at the entrance of the cave. But before they entered, Brandon leaned down, grabbing a bunch of flints, sticks, and leaves. Amy approached him, tilting her head, her hands clasped behind her back. What are you doing? I'll make a fire out of this. You know how to do that? I think so. Brandon was glad to have read a survival book back when he was in the bookstore. He just grabbed as many books as he could, regardless of the content. Of course, he had lingering regrets with that decision, because 3 of the books were smut, and he had to pay for all the books before reading. Of course, when he returned home, he immediately burnt the 3 books. A necessary sacrifice. After picking up an appropriate amount, he beckoned inside the cave, signaling for Amy to enter as well. Whoosh! Whoa, you really did it. Amy clapped her hands in astonishment. Seated face to face with her, Brandon was surprised as well. He never thought it would actually work. He'd only read the application of making a fire. But this was the first time he'd actually done it. Accelerated cognition working its magic. Tearing his gaze from the flames, he looked above. Just hovering in the air was a system interface. It was quite similar to his system, but it was one of the virtual simulation's features. Click! Clicking on it, a virtual map materialized in his view. On it displayed the current safe zone, as well as the timer just below it. 4:46. 4 hours and 46 minutes. They were informed that the safe zone would shrink every 30 minutes. A warning would appear on the map on whatever the amount of space the convergence zone would take. Glancing at the map, it seemed like they were still within boundaries. After that, he closed it. Too cold. The two continued to shiver relentlessly, despite the flames keeping them warm to a certain degree. Staring at the fire, his attention was redirected to Amy, who shuddered, as she pursed her lips to say, What should we do next? Brandon pondered for a while, unsure of what to say. The best choice was to relocate to a different biome, but in doing so would expose them to attacks in every angle. It had to be noted that every 15 minutes, everyone who's out in the open would be exposed on the map. A red dot would appear, signaling the location of anyone that was outside. And to their surprise, there wasn't an indicator of how many students were still alive, meaning they wouldn't know what ranking they'd place if they died. For all they knew, they could be expelled, even if the timer was down to the last hour. So for now, let's wait. Okay. It was then when the system interface notified him. 4:45. Instantly, Brandon opened the map, trying to see if anyone's location was exposed. And to his surprise, Amy, get up. I know. There was someone nearby, just outside the cave. For some reason, Amy was hiding behind Brandon. But Brandon didn't mind. Amy's water magic would be a good support for his lightning. Step. Footsteps became audible just outside the cave. Step, step, step. As the footsteps became louder, two silhouettes emerged at the entrance. What battle royale? This is a vacation. Splash dash. Claire stood at the sea, splashing water at Raven, as he motioned his hand to block the incoming water. Huh, how are you so? Splash dash. Calm in this. Splash dash. Situation. Splash dash. Please stop. Raven raised his hand to his face, dabbing at the droplets of water. Claire flashed him a wide grin, placing her hands on her waist. It's because I'm strong. And plus, you're here, Mr. Ranked 1 student. Are you that confident in winning? Of course, we're both the top 3 students within the first years. We're practically a cheat. Can anyone even oppose us? I can name 2 people. All right, but splash dash. Do you see them around? Claire stated, continuing to splash water at Raven. Drenched in water, Raven responded. Nope, but we shouldn't let our splash. Guard down. Claire, please. Fine, fine. What a killjoy. It's not every day we get to go to the beach, you know. It's not even real. Splash dash. Is this not real enough for you? After that, the system interface notified Raven. Claire. Yeah, their location was exposed. And to their surprise, there was a red that appeared on the location near them. Rustle. The bushes in front of them rustled with movement. Immediately, Raven retrieved his daggers, holding one in each hand. Sheeing. From behind him, Claire did the same, unsheathing her rapier from her sword belt, which was placed on her waist. As 2 figures emerged from the bushes, Raven immediately used Shadow Step, teleporting right behind him, or rather, his shadow. The man's eyes shot wide open. Ow! Slash dash! Splurt! He gave him no time to finish his words, as he opted to slit the man's throat. Vush dash! From beside him, a torrent of flames tried to engulf him. But Raven quickly dodged it, stepping to the side. What met his line of sight was a woman, a mage, with long brown hair and black eyes. She wore a look of shock as she spoke. Please spare me. I don't want to get X. Swoosh. TSZ. Claire immediately bolted from her position as sparks of purple lightning left her trail, giving the woman no time to plead for her life, as she mercilessly stabbed her in the abdomen. Both the man and the woman dispersed, dematerializing, as particles fluttered in the air and blood splattered from where their body was. At that, they've successfully killed the pair. The battle royale was still in the early stages after all. Glancing at Claire, who was still fixed in a crouch position, her rapier facing forward, Raven gave her a nod. Good work. You too. Still, is it just me? Or do I feel bad? It's just you. Remember, Astria Academy is a school for elites. Only the best of the best survive here. Raven immediately dismissed his thoughts, erasing any feelings of lingering guilt. You're right, sorry. It's fine. Just reminding you. Thanks. Raven then glanced up at the sky as he muttered. I wonder how Brandon and Amy are doing. Sparks of blue lightning, just at the tip of his finger, ready to strike at any moment. While behind him, Amy had conjured a bubble of water. Step, step! The two figures approached, entering the cave. Taking in their sight, they appeared to be two men. One of them stood tall, but not as tall as Brandon, while the other was short, most likely of 5 feet 4 inches. Brandon lifted his arm, his fingertips clad in blue sparks ready to discharge. But as soon as the spark was about to strike, the taller man raised both of his arms. His voice then reached Brandon. "Wait, we come in peace." As their figure finally became visible, the taller man had ginger hair, while the shorter one had onyx hair. Brandon narrowed his eyes. "How can we trust you? We each have sea coats for YU2. So they came prepared?" As the two approached, they confirmed their statement. Both of them were wearing thick fur coats, while they each carried another fur coat to share. Step! The two made their way inside the cave, inching closer to Brandon and Amy. Scanning their expressions, they really did come in peace. The tall man's black eyes harbored no ill intentions. The same went for the shorter man's purple eyes. From behind him, Amy stood down, dispersing the bubble of water. But Brandon kept his hand up. "Wait, don't move." He signaled with his hand for them to stop. The two men followed his instructions, pausing just a few distance from the fire. "Names?" At that, the taller man introduced himself first. "I'm Seth Hudson, and he's Red Quinton." Unfamiliar names. With the fire illuminating their figure, the two men adorned swords on their backs. Duelists? Most likely. At that, Brandon lowered his hand, but still keeping his guard up. "Sit." The two men immediately followed suit, pausing by the fire and sitting down. Then, they offered the coats they were carrying. Brandon accepted it, taking both coats and giving the other one to Amy. Swoosh! He immediately donned the fur coat, its black cloth making a whoosh sound. Amy did the same with her blue fur coat. "Thanks." "Thank you." They showed their appreciation, as the two men nodded with smiles on their faces. After donning the coat, Brandon turned his attention towards the two. "If you come in peace, does that mean you want to team up?" At his question, Seth turned to look at Red, then redirected back to Brandon. "Yes, but what's your name?" "Brandon Locke." Brandon then looked at Amy, who was still behind him. "And she's Amy Ashfield, right?" It was Red who finished for Brandon. Amy leaned in, stepping in Brandon's side. You know who I am? I think most of the students know who the top 5 in the first years are." He had a point. The only reason they didn't know Brandon was because he was ranked so low. After being recognized, Amy sat down. She looked at Brandon with a smirk, as if saying, "See how popular I am." Brandon rolled his eyes and sat down as well. Seated face to face with the two, Seth spoke up. "To be paired with Amy Ashfield. You must be someone amazing yourself, right?" "Nope." Brandon immediately shot him down. Seth was puzzled, tilting his head. Noticing it, Brandon blankly stated, "I'm ranked 1,890th. EHHH. The two reacted in confusion as they turned to look at each other, then back to Brandon. "Looks like we're in the same boat. I'm ranked 1,590th, and Red here is ranked 1,231st. Same boat. They're ranked higher than me." But it didn't matter, as Brandon dismissed his thoughts. The real question was, where did you two get the coats? At Brandon's question, Red immediately responded. Apparently, they came from the rural side of the world where the climate was cold. The two had been friends for a long time, and coming to the city, they were used to wearing fur coats. But it doesn't answer why they had extra coats. Thus, Brandon decided to ask, "And why did you have spares to share with us?" Red responded once again, "Loot. We stole it from a party we killed." "Loot? So if someone was killed, they'd drop whatever they were wearing?" At his question, Seth immediately waved him off. "Yes, I think so." "I see. Does it go for your weapons as well?" "I'm not sure, since the party we killed were mages." There was one more question. "Were they wearing the coats before you killed them, or did they remove them?" The two pondered for a while. The stupid question must have caught them off guard. But nonetheless, Seth responded in a seemingly mocking tone. "What kind of question is that? Of course they were wearing them. We're in the tundra biome, after all." "I see. TSZZZ." Giving them no time to react, blue sparks of lightning protruded from Brandon's fingertips, directly piercing Seth. "Kook." What? From beside Brandon, Amy stood up. Her expression seemed to tell that she was shocked as well. Brandon, Brandon was immediately suspicious once they told him that the coat came from the mages they killed. After all, the coat. It's clean. There was no blood. He'd already confirmed that it was indeed possible to bleed inside the virtual simulation, as he accidentally wounded himself when he made the fire. The designs are also the same, only the colors were different. If there was another party that brought the same kind of fur coats, just like you guys, then shouldn't their story be the same? That they must have come from the same cold region as Seth and Red. Also, not only that, but the moment the locations were exposed, you two were already inside the cave. They shouldn't have been marked on the map. That could only mean, so, are they outside? Another party. Sheeing. Immediately, Red stood up, unsheathing his sword, while Seth was still on the ground, his hand covering his wound. It was a good plan. You've successfully made Amy let down her guard. Amy, who was standing up, looked at Brandon, who was still seated. She wore a look of defeat, but immediately contoured it to a determined gaze. Huh, I'll handle this then. Suit yourself. Brandon nodded while closing his eyes. In front of them, Red took a step back. His terrified gaze lingered on Seth on the ground. Damn it, Seth. You just had to keep talking. At that, seemingly recovered, Seth stood up. Oh, that's my bad, but he's just a low ranker. Only Amy Ashfield would pose a threat to us. He then looked behind him, where the entrance was situated, and continued. The jig is up. Come out, guys. At his instructions, silhouettes emerged at the entrance of the cave. Brandon scanned them. There were 6 figures entering the cave. So you've teamed up with 3 of the parties? Huh? Brandon was confident he could take on 2 parties, but he didn't expect there to be more. It seemed like it was planned way before the battle royale started. Glancing at Amy, who fixed in a battle stance, Brandon locked his gaze with her. Still think you can handle it? I can try. Don't be stubborn. After speaking those words, Brandon gradually stood up, seemingly ready to take on 4 parties at once. TSSSSSZZ. He's good, Evelyn muttered to herself as her eyes were peeled to the screen in front of her. The way Brandon saw right through their plot. The attention to detail. He definitely wasn't an idiot. So how did a man as smart as him score so low in his tests? Did he do it on purpose? It was obvious that Brandon was hiding his potential as a deviant, but they couldn't be sure if he actually was one. There were cases of mistaking regular mages as deviants since the wind affinity was white as well. But from what she's seen, it seemed like Brandon could use the lightning affinity. So why is he hiding his abilities? If he revealed himself, then he would undoubtedly be one of the top students in the academy. He wouldn't have to handicap himself to the lightning affinity. Regardless, she had definitely piqued her interest. I want him. Clink. Ah. From beside her, Vanessa looked at Evelyn with a shocked expression as she dropped her fork. And no, I mean, I want to take him under me. EHHH. Huh. I can't find the right words. You mean take him under your wing? Yes, that. One of the offers provided to Astria Academy professors was that they were allowed to choose any of the students to become their protege. In short, their very own pupil. Brandon had checked most of the boxes of her desired pupil. There was only one criteria left: how good he was in a fight. Just because someone was good at magic didn't automatically mean they were good at fighting. They can have all the fancy magic in the world, but if they had little to no combat intelligence, then there was no point. As her eyes were peeled to the screen, it seemed like the fight was about to start. Too bad it wasn't Raven Blackheart and Claire Victoria. But Amy Ashfield is a good catch. Yeah, good job, Seth. From the entrance, the words of 2 of the figures reached Amy's ears, a man and a woman. Seeing that they had no weapons, they seemed to be mages. Seth and Red fixed a battle stance, swords out forward, facing Brandon and Amy. TSZZZ. Instantly, Brandon flashed forward, abruptly stopping in front of the 2 as blue sparks left his trail. The 2 wore shocked expressions, while Brandon just stared at them closely. He was too close. Fast. But is that all? Swoosh. Seth swung down his sword to cut Brandon horizontally. However, TSZZZZ. Brandon disappeared, leaving a spark of lightning from where he stood. "Coop, help!" Brandon instantly appeared beside him, gripping Red's throat. He lifted him up. "Rag!" With a battle cry, Seth tried to help him out, swinging his sword at Brandon. "Tszzzz. Wah!" Once again, Brandon disappeared, leaving trails of blue sparks. He'd thought he'd land a hit on Brandon, forcibly swinging his sword. But, as Seth's sword struck Red instead, as Red instantly dematerialized. White particles fluttered from his figure. Fuck! Fast! Brandon was too fast. It seemed like he was playing with them. Even Amy stood frozen, shocked at what Brandon just did. "He doesn't even need me." Brandon stood behind Seth, facing the crowd from the entrance, as he coldly muttered to Seth, "I pose no threat to you, so you can deal with Amy instead. Bastard." Swoosh! Tszzzz. As Seth swung his sword behind him, Brandon had already blinked away. What can I even do in this situation? Brandon was doing everything. But, "Amy, I'll take 4 and you take 3, including Seth." "Got it." Amy immediately nodded at his words, conjuring a bubble of water. At least he knows how to share. In front of Amy, Seth locked his gaze with her. His eyes mixed with terror and rage. He must have been terrified. After all, he had only seen Amy as a threat, completely disregarding Brandon. And that was his mistake. Amy could tell that Brandon would easily surpass her in the rankings. "He's stronger than me." She clenched her teeth. "I don't like this." Annoyed. If Brandon was that strong in the first place, then what was the point of being his partner? She remembered. Because of that night, she'd forgotten the reason why she approached Brandon in the first place. To assess whether he had any connections to Moriarty, or whether he was the man himself. He's strong, but not as strong as Moriarty. Of course, she'd never actually seen him fight, but she could tell with a glance. Moriarty's strength was unparalleled. Thus, she concluded, Brandon isn't Moriarty, but did he have any connections to him? Unsure. She clenched her teeth once again. Frustrated. I just can't connect the dots together. Just where did Brandon go that night? If he isn't Moriarty, and the ashes belonged to Felix, then where the hell was Brandon? Moriarty must have let him go, just like he did with her. Finally, it was all starting to make sense. So Moriarty saved him from Felix. She had finally reached a conclusion. Indeed, if that was the case, then Moriarty must be a righteous person. A really strong one at that. A deviant. Thinking back to the night, seeing Moriarty's figure, something warm welled up within Amy. Whatever it was, she didn't know. Maybe idolization? Regardless, she wasn't afraid of Moriarty anymore. In fact, I want to see him. She then dismissed her thoughts, focusing on Seth in front of her. A ranked 4th and a ranked 1,590th. The results were obvious, as if comparing night and day. At that, Seth charged towards her, aiming to swing his sword. An admirable attempt. But, with the bubble behind her, Amy instantly contoured it into small myriads of water droplets. Then, drip, drip, SWSHH, SWSHH, SWSHH. The droplets cut through the air towards Seth in a manner of rapid bullets. Water bullets, fast enough to pierce through flesh. AGHH. A myriad of water bullets continued to mercilessly pierce through Seth. SWSHH, SWSHH, SWSHH. Clank. Seth continued to twitch spontaneously at each bullet, dropping his sword. The bullets were long and extremely thin, and due to the darkness of the cave, it was barely visible. SWSHH, SWSHH, SWSHH. Seth couldn't even react at how fast each bullet was going him. KSZE. Seth dispersed into white, fluttering particles. Blood splattered everywhere on the ground, the walls, the ceiling. A gruesome sight. Redirecting her attention in front of her, 3 more figures became visible, walking towards her. But, as she scanned each and every one of their expressions, all of their eyes were wide open, seemingly terrified. Was it because of what she did? Or was it because of Brandon? Her question was then answered as one of the figures spoke up, a woman. Please kill us instead, anyone but him. What? Amy was puzzled, tilting her head. Him? Brandon? Just what did Brandon do for them to be so terrified? Thud! It was then when the three of them slumped down on the ground, kneeling. They clasped their hands together and pleaded, Please, I don't care if I get expelled. I don't want to be in the same academy as that monster. Kill us, I want to go home already. Please. What the foo? It was then when Amy noticed one of the mages only had one arm left. What the hell did Brandon do? She then redirected her gaze at the cave's entrance, trying to look for Brandon. It was quiet. Too quiet. She breathed out a heavy sigh, conjuring a line of water in front of her. Step. As she stepped forward, one of the figures spoke up. Thank why. / Maybe I'll take Amy Ashfield as my protege. MHM. Vanessa's words barely reached Evelyn's ears as she blankly stared at her. It had been quite a while since the battle royale started, and the whole time, Vanessa didn't stop stuffing pastry in her mouth. She was eating way too much. You'll get fat with all the sweets you're eating. Nope, I try to maintain my figure as much as I can. Vanessa then stood up, placing her hands on her waist, and flashed Evelyn a sly smirk. See? Scanning her figure, she adorned the Astrea Academy's uniform for women, a sleek sleeveless black dress that accentuated her curves. Her long flowing brown hair cascaded down her back, stopping right on her butt. She was fairly slim, and her figure was well proportionate. She was a model through and through. Vanessa turned to look at Evelyn as well, who was seated as she spoke. Still, your figure is way better than mine. Maybe I should stop eating this much. It wasn't a lie. They were the same height, and their figure was almost the same. Only that, Evelyn's sleeveless dress seemed to wrap tighter around her, compared to Vanessa. Vanessa seemed to notice something as she placed her hand on her chin, pondering. She bent forward, leaning close to Evelyn as she thoroughly scanned her. Evelyn could see Vanessa's face up close. What are you doing? Your chest. HM. Did they get bigger? What is this woman talking about? No. They definitely did get bigger. No response. What was the point of this conversation? If you sign with my agency, you'll definitely rake in more money than me. So it was to market her modeling agency. Not interested. Come on. Lots of guys would buy a magazine with you on the cover. Nope. Despite her refusal, there was a tinge of truth in Vanessa's words. Ever since Evelyn started her professor career, there were countless of male professors who tried to court her. But in the end, she refused all of them. She had no time for such nonsense. She had one goal in mind, to reach the top, to become the pinnacle of all mages. But if she were to settle down, then she wanted a man who didn't see her for her beauty, a man that could see her for who she really was. She may seem cold and stern, but it was mostly because she was introverted. Because of her introversion, she severely lacked in the communication skill department. To avoid a blunder, she'd put on a stern demeanor so people would avoid approaching her. Glancing at Vanessa, who had already sat back down, she reached out for the remote. Switch. As she redirected her attention back to the screen, the boy with the pale white hair was displayed. Brandon Locke, the boy she set her sights on as a potential protege. What? This? So, which of you wants to deal with me? Only 4 volunteers. Brandon stood at the cave's entrance as he coldly locked eyes with each of the 6 people in front of him. From beside him, someone spoke out loud. A man's voice. Don't be so cocky, you know, bod. TSZZC. Before the man could finish, a spark of blue lightning shaped like a spear flashed from behind him. It mercilessly pierced him as he spontaneously twitched due to the electrocution. KSZZ. The man instantly dispersed, dematerializing into white, fluttering particles. Wah! Swoosh, 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 swoosh. All the figures turned to look behind them, only to find an innumerable amount of lightning spears ready to erase them as it did with the man. It was as if they were being held hostages, and due to the nature of lightning, it would be way too fast for them to react to it. At that, Brandon spoke up once again, his voice detached of any mercy. My mistake, 3 volunteers. Let's take this outside, okay? All the mages in front of him seemed to be terrified. There was no room to retort as they immediately followed Brandon's instructions. Step, step. They beckoned outside. The vast expanse of tundra had become visible. In front of him, the woman in the middle of the group broke the silence as she turned to look at her comrades. Gee, guys, do as he says. We could take him out once we're in a better position. Brandon raised his brow, amused. Oh, you think I'd let you do that? Why, yes. You would have killed us already if you wouldn't. She had a point. Brandon didn't want to end the fight fast. He wanted to try out everything he learned from books. Brandon then curled his lips to a smirk. He said, Right. Whoever wants to fight Amy can proceed. Everyone else, stay. As he emphasized the last word, his eyes narrowed and his voice deepened, trying to put immense pressure on the group of parties. While he waited, the woman spoke up once again. See, could you let us discuss first? Brandon tilted his head in amusement. There was no harm in letting them do that, and if they tried to escape, he could just kill them. Sure, but stay within my line of sight. The woman nodded. There was no room for negotiation. At that, the group huddled together, forming a circle. Brandon couldn't help but try to eavesdrop. However, he couldn't. The woman had conjured up a sound barrier. Interesting. A mage with the sound affinity was quite rare. From what Brandon knew, there were 7 basic elements: fire, water, earth, wind, nature, lightning, ice. But there were special forms of affinity as well, such as light, shadow, time, space, life, fauna, psionic, gravity, morphic, celestial, quantum, mirror, sound, and so much more. But it was too much for him to remember at the moment. Mages could evolve their basic element into the next stage with training, while some were born with the innate talent to use the special affinities without training. From what he knew, Vanessa and Evelyn were good examples for it. Vanessa had evolved her earth affinity into the gravity affinity, while Evelyn was born to already harness the celestial affinity. Either the woman had evolved her wind affinity to the sound affinity, or she was born with it. He didn't know, but it was definitely interesting. As he was lost in his thoughts, the group seemed to have finished their discussion as the sound barrier was lifted. At that, Brandon spoke up while the group turned to look at him. Have you decided? Yes. 2 of the mages then strode forward as they passed by Brandon. Quests. Survive. Rewards. EXP plus 50. Stat points plus 3. System coins plus 50. Penalty. Failure to accomplish this task will get all your attributes locked for 7 days. Brandon then turned to sneak a glance at the 2 behind him. They stopped walking. Predictable. TSZZ. Brandon instantly blinked back without turning his body around, directly facing the 2, grabbing both of their necks. Kook. Vush. One of the mages engulfed themselves in flames, burning Brandon as well. An attempt to take their own life just to burn Brandon. Aga. Since he'd never increased his def stat, Brandon felt the burning sensation on his hand. He immediately let go of the 2, rubbing his hand, only to find it etched with burn marks. The blue lightning spears dispersed as well as he lost control over them. A blunder. KSZZ. The mage who burned himself had dispersed into white, fluttering particles. After transmigrating into the world, Brandon had never felt pain before. It was a new feeling for him, and it hurt. A lot. Even the sensation was accurately portrayed by the virtual simulation. This is crazy. He knitted his brows and contoured a smirk. The mages then threw a barrage of skills his way. An earthen spike contoured from the ground, trying to pierce him, while crystalline of ice protruded from the ground, headed towards him. Gusts of winds shaped like discs pierced through the air, while water seemingly formed from his feet, trying to tangle him. Mana disruption was out of the question as the spells had already formed. He couldn't disperse the mana that had already formed an elemental shape. Despite beating Alpha, who was a professional killer, 6 mages from an elite academy at once was still too much for him. Should I do it? He was severely handicapped by only using the lightning affinity only. As long as he didn't use fire, then it might be fine. Crackle. At that, he conjured an ice wall to block the crystalline of ice. Then, whoosh, A gust of wind instantly dispersed the wind discs. Tszz. As the earthen spike was seemingly about to hit him, Brandon blinked back to dodge it. All the mages' eyes shot wide open, as their mouths were left agape. At that moment, Brandon Locke had become a known tri-elemental deviant throughout the entire academy. Crazy. I was suspicious he was a deviant. But 3 elements. Vanessa then turned to glance at Evelyn with a smirk, as if saying, I'll take him before you can. Nope. I've already decided. I know, but I've set my sights on him first. Doesn't matter. Evelyn waved her off. Fine. But it still comes down to who he'll choose as his personal instructor. He'll choose me. Evelyn was confident. As they spoke, Evelyn had never peeled her eyes away from the screen. Brandon Locke. He was special. Deviants were rare. But tri-elemental deviants were an extremely rare case. A once-in-a-generation talent. How are you so sure? Vanessa snapped her out of her thoughts. Tried to assess where her confidence stems from. I won't let him refuse. She would pour in all her resources just to get Brandon Locke to accept being her protege. She couldn't let a talent like him slip away. Well, I won't back down. Vanessa crossed her arms and leaned back on the circular couch, redirecting her attention to the screen. There's no point. Just get Amy Ashfield and be on your way. Despite being introverted, Evelyn was extremely competitive. She didn't want to lose to her best friend. We'll see about that. MHM still. The academy's going to be crazy for a while. Yeah. Unbeknownst to the students participating in the Battle Royale, the entire session was being live-streamed for the entire academy to see. All the first years would have the same session. But Evelyn's class was the first one scheduled to take the Battle Royale. As the Battle Royale was ongoing, classes were suspended for the week. Hence, why Vanessa was there. If anyone wanted to watch the session, they'd have to go to the academy on their own accord. Knock, knock. Someone knocked on the door. Who is it? Vanessa inquired. A muffled voice from behind the door then reached their ears. Is that Miss Vanessa? A woman's voice. Yes, it is. It's Belle Locke. May I come in? Evelyn then chimed in. The Locke's surname was familiar to her. Who's that? The student council president of the academy. Was that why it was familiar? Vanessa then stood up, motioning towards a door, and unlocked it. Creak. The door gradually opened, revealing a woman. Long pale white hair flowing down her shoulders. Familiar ice blue eyes, and perfectly symmetrical facial features, clear from all blemishes. Soft succulent lips, moist, clear of any cracks. In short, she was extremely beautiful. She donned the Astria Academy uniform, which accentuated her curves. Her sleek black skirt, just short enough to reveal her jade white thighs. On her uniform was a golden pin that etched the student council logo. Step. She entered the room with regal. Each step exuded confidence. As Belle continued to walk toward her, Vanessa shut the door close and locked it. She then turned towards Evelyn, locking eyes with her as she informed. She's also Brandon Locke's older sister. So that's why the Locke surname was so familiar. Hey, Sarah, he's not normal. Let's retreat. No. In front of him, Brandon could hear one of the mages speaking to the sound mage. The mage's voice trembled. So her name is Sarah. An unfamiliar character. Another extra. Truthfully, Sarah was fairly attractive. Black hair tied to a ponytail, purple eyes that contoured to a determined gaze. She was tall, taller than any of the girls in his friend group. She seemed to be the leader, as the mages with her tended to rely on her orders. But her beauty isn't what caught Brandon's attention. It was her magic. The whole time, she had never used any sound magic to attack Brandon. Why? It was peculiar. Was she preparing for a surprise attack? Brandon couldn't tell. It should have been obvious that they were at a disadvantage, now that Brandon had stopped handicapping himself to only using lightning. Yet Sarah refused the plea to retreat. What is she planning? Regardless, Brandon was determined to kill them. Whatever Sarah was planning for him didn't matter. I'll win. He smirked. Crackle. An ice sword slowly materialized in his hand, gripping it tightly. He'd already learned all of the advanced swordsmanship from the books he bought, though only in theory. This was his chance to test its application. The mage whose neck he gripped had already recovered and returned to their position. Step. An ice sword in his hand, Brandon stepped forward. The mages all locked eyes with him. Their expressions were serious. They must have realized he was now in a different league, as they focused all their attention on his every move. It was then when one of the mages lifted his hand, conjuring mana. However, mana disruption, since mana disruption didn't have any visible effects, no one would notice Brandon did something. No one but the victims themselves. Wah! Spark crackle! At that, Brandon flashed forward as trails of blue sparks left his trail. Brandon instantly blinked in front of the mage. The mage's hand was still lifted up, trying to conjure mana. But it was futile. Then, swoosh, splurt. His arm was cleanly sliced off. Fuck. With the ice sword raised up, Brandon tried to swing it and cut his head off. Vush! Spark. A gust of wind tried to blow him away, but he immediately blinked back. But water shaped like a whip had managed to grab hold of his leg. Now! Sarah screamed, giving out her orders. Instantly, a barrage of wind and water made their way towards Brandon. One of the mages, seemingly the ice mage, tried to conjure up her mana. Yet nothing happened. Since mana disruption could only target one specific spot, object, inanimate or animate, Brandon couldn't do anything about the other magic skills. He couldn't do it simultaneously, and there was a time lag. But he was relieved since the ice couldn't mix with the water on his leg. At the moment, the ice mage was the most dangerous opponent, besides Sarah, who still didn't do anything. With the water whip grabbing his leg, Brandon protruded lightning sparks from his feet. TSZZE. The sparks slowly crawled up to the water mage. He hut. At that, the whip dissipated as the water mage twitched spontaneously. Idiot, you've forgotten he can use lightning as well. Sarah stepped back, reprimanding the water mage. TSZZ. Brandon once again flashed forward, dodging the gust of wind. He then appeared in front of the ice mage. Sarah, help! Spurt. Her plea was abruptly cut off as Brandon cleanly slit her throat. Blood splattered everywhere, staining Brandon's clothes, as the ice mage dematerialized into white particles. KSZZ. His attention was then redirected on his back. The black fur coat dematerialized as well. So, she was the owner. Step. They took a step back. There were only 4 mages left, while one of them was out of commission, having no arm. Brandon coldly locked his gaze with them, then to Sarah. Why aren't you doing anything? 2 of them had already died. Yet Sarah had never revealed her cards. Yeah, are you just going to let us die, Sarah? One of the mages, seemingly the earth mage, screamed. His expressions were one of terror, as he held the spot where his arm once was. Shut up, shut up. Brandon was taken aback. Sarah seemed to have lost it, disheveling her hair. Could it be? You. At Brandon's words, Sarah turned to the left, then to the right, then eventually looked back at Brandon, while pointing at herself. And me. Yes, you. The only thing you can do is create a sound barrier. Can't you? She hesitated. It all makes sense now. She had no magic skills that would aid her in a fight. In other words, are you the 2021th ranked student? The lowest rank possible. Though he didn't show it, Brandon was quite surprised. Who knew the lowest ranked student had a rare affinity? Her gaze tore down with an anxious expression. Hold on. Is that true, Sarah? The earth mage grumbled, while the other mages stared at Sarah as well. Fuck, I shouldn't have paired up with you. It was then when Sarah continuously stomped her foot on the ground. Shut up, shut up, shut up. You were the one who approached me after finding out I was a sound mage. So don't put the blame on me. Sarah then turned to look at the arm that wasn't there and continued. I may be a fraud, but at least I didn't get my arm cut off. Sarah seemed to have enough. Brandon blankly stared at the group as they continued to argue. But it was then when the mages formed a circle surrounding Sarah. Hold on. They were about to kill her. Distasteful. But nonetheless, Brandon let the scene unfold. To let the others do the dirty work for him. As the mages conjured up their mana, Sarah's voice reached his ears. Fuck. I don't care anymore. I'm dropping out after this. She'd given up. A shame. Her potential would be a waste. Sound magic was rare. Attending the academy was only the beginning for Sarah to have complete mastery over it. She can't drop out now. It would have been a waste. Thus, Brandon decided, hey, at his call, all the mages reluctantly turned their heads at him. They trembled. Just a simple word from Brandon was enough for them to be shaken. If you kill her, I'll come find you after the battle royale. They tilted their heads, confused. But Brandon wasn't done. He continued, coldly emphasizing his last words. And I'll kill you myself. At his last statement, all three of the mages surrounding Sarah had their eyes wide open. They shakingly lifted their hands down. Silence. No one retorted. The one to have broken the silence was Brandon, as he spoke up once again. I'll give you two choices. I'll kill you all right here and now. Or, he turned to look at the cave's entrance, then continued. You can go back inside and let Amy Ashfield kill you. He spoke in a tone that seemed to tell there was no room for negotiation. They stood still, frozen, until, one of them stepped forward. It was the Earth Mage. Hey, we haven't lost yet. Are you really going to agree with his demands? The one to have said those words seemed to be the Water Mage, as she grabbed the man's shoulder, trying to stop him. Are you confident you could beat him? The Earth Mage glanced at Brandon, then back to the Water Mage. And no, but if we all work together then. Ridiculous. There were 8 of us at the start. How many of us are left now? The Water Mage couldn't respond and took a glance at Brandon as well. You get it? That man, he's a monster. People like us, we're only stepping stones for him. I first entered this academy with aspirations, thinking I could become someone special. The Earth Mage looked down with a sorrowful expression. He clenched his hands tightly to the point where blood started dripping. I know it's only a simulation, but when I lost my arm, his voice started to crack. You know what an arm means to a mage, don't you? A mage's lifeline. Tears started to drip, flowing down his cheek, as his voice continued to crack. Monsters like them, Raven Blackheart, Reinhard Van, Claire Victoria, Amy Ashfield, Rachel Asami. I can't compete with them. Step. He stepped forward, motioning towards the cave. I'm dropping out as well. This academy, it's too much for me. Tears continued to drip down. Wait. The Water Mage called out to him, while the other mage stood by her side. Let's all go together. The Earth Mage seemed taken aback, but nodded with a smile plastered on his face. Okay. But when he turned to glance at Brandon, he stared right into his cold eyes. He then trembled in fear. He might have thought Brandon would come for him after the Battle Royale session, as he urgently told the 2 mages to hurry up. At that, they entered the cave. Their figures gradually coalesced with the dark until Brandon couldn't see them anymore. The entire time, Sarah stood silent. She then turned to look at Brandon. Her previously terrified expression had contoured to a blank slate. Why did you spare me? Spare you? What's she talking about? Is all Brandon could think of. So you aren't going to spare me? No. I'll just talk some senses into you. Brandon then strode forward, motioning towards Sarah, then paused just a few inches from her. Don't drop out. Your talent. It would be a waste. Sarah seemed puzzled, tilting her head. She then pursed her lips to say, Talent? I was useless the whole time, yet you tell me I have talent? Huh. Truthfully, Brandon didn't know anything about Sarah. She was a character that had never appeared in the novel. But your mana capacity. What? It's leaking. She had a lot of mana. Too much that her body couldn't contain all of it. Brandon then lifted his ice sword and continued. I'll kill you now, but I'll come find you after all of this is over. Wah! Swoosh! Quest completed. Rewards obtained. EXP plus 50. Stat points plus 3. System coins plus 50. Tack tack. Walking around the halls of Astria Academy, Bell's heels clicked against the marbled floor. Good morning, President Bell. Greetings, President. Along the way, she'd be greeted by the students. She'd then return their greetings with a nod. She had heard that the first-year students' battle royale was scheduled today, particularly Brandon's combat class. The session was streamed live, and from a distance, she could see the students gathering to watch it from a screen. Battle Royale was a session that every first-year student had to take. She took it as well when she was a first year, placing first. Belle was quite interested in this year's session, but she refrained from watching. The reason for this was because she didn't want to see Brandon killed. Though it would only be a simulation, just the sight of her own little brother dying before her eyes would be terrifying. Tack, tack. The hall continued to echo by the clicking of her heels. But the sound was immediately drowned out by the chattering of the students. It was then when the student's words caught her attention. Does anyone know who that student is? No, but he looks familiar. Doesn't he kind of look like President Bell? Oh, now that you mention it, they do look alike. That's President Bell's younger brother, Brandon Locke. Brandon? Why were they talking about Brandon? Did he lose already? She suddenly had a bad feeling. She had to know why they were talking about him. Tack, tack. She approached the group of students. President Bell, good morning. Good morning, President. Bell then nodded at their greetings, but didn't spare them any glances. Tack, tack. It was then she could finally see the screen. What caught her attention was the boy displayed on the screen. Pale white hair, ice blue eyes, and lightning, ice, wind. She was surprised as her eyes shot wide open. Is that really Brandon? Truthfully, she never knew just how capable Brandon was. The two siblings were quite close growing up, but when Belle awakened as a deviant, she moved overseas to pursue her education. Thus, the two siblings drifted apart. But at 16 years old was when the academy called upon her. She was given the offer to become the student council president in exchange for attending Astria Academy. Of course, she accepted the offer and returned to the country, reuniting with her family. But shortly after, she moved to the city to attend the academy. It was only recently when the two siblings reconnected again. Though for some reason, the Brandon that she knew was quite different to the Brandon currently. But she didn't mind it, concluding that it must have been because of puberty. This was the first time Belle had actually seen Brandon use magic. And to her surprise, he was a deviant just like her. But 3 elements. He exceeded her expectations. While Brandon had 3, Belle only had 2 elements. Light and wind. Light magic was extremely rare. In fact, it was one of the higher forms of affinities. This made Belle a prodigy, fitting to her title as the strongest second-year student. But Brandon, he had more potential than her. With 3 elements, he could have 3 special affinities. She had no more. She then peeled away from the screen, heading towards the virtual simulation room. The room would usually be off limits for regular students. But since Belle was the student council president, she could bypass most of the rules. Tack, tack. She continued to walk as the halls continued to echo with her heels clicking on the marbled floor. This proceeded until she arrived at her destination. Knock, knock. As she knocked, a muffled voice from the other room reached her ears. Who is it? It was Vanessa. After making herself known, the doors slowly creaked open. Entering the room, what caught her attention was another woman, seated on the circular couch. Dark purple hair and cold cyan eyes. She instantly knew who it was. Evelyn Cessna, one of the strongest mages in the world. She had heard that Evelyn was attending the academy as a professor, but she didn't know she'd be Brandon's combat class instructor. Belle was jealous. Truthfully, she was a huge fan of Evelyn. Evelyn had a stacked record of achievements, from wraithbound subjugations to guild contributions and so many more. And despite her fame, she was humble. While other mages would bask in their success, Evelyn would stay away from the public, doing her own thing. She was a source of inspiration for Belle. Since this was the first time they'd met, Belle tried to compose herself. Don't fangirl, don't fangirl, don't fangirl, don't fangirl. She was then snapped out of her thoughts by Evelyn, who was looking at her with a blank expression. Hello, I'm a new instructor here. My name is Evelyn Cessna, right? There was no helping it. Belle immediately ran towards her, clasping Evelyn's hands. Why, yes. Evelyn seemed taken aback, unsure of what to make out of the situation. My name is Belle Locke, and I'm a huge fan. Could I have your autograph? Belle then let go of one hand and reached out for all the pockets in her outfit. Let's see. Where did I put my pen? Ahem. Vanessa snapped her out of it. Belle then let go of Evelyn's hand. My apologies. I'm here too, you know. I'm a fan too, Miss Vanessa. "Sai, what brings you here?" At Vanessa's question, Belle tried to recall why she entered the room in the first place. Ah, ah. She redirected her attention to the screen, only to find Brandon lifting an ice sword up. The girl in front of him seemed to be doing nothing about it, as she stood frozen. It was normal for the students to kill each other during the battle royale. But those eyes, they were cold, detached of any warmth. Was this really the sweet little boy she grew up with? Just what happened to Brandon in the 6 years that she was gone? "I'll kill you now, but I'll come find you after all of this is over." Brandon then proceeded to mercilessly thrust his ice blade into the girl's chest. Ah! The three women in the room tilted their heads. They all thought of one thing. Did Brandon just flirt with her? After Brandon killed Sarah, Amy exited the cave and made her way to Brandon's side. She knitted her brow and pursed her lips to say, "What the hell did you do to them? Huh? What was she talking about? Don't hum me. They came to me completely terrified. They didn't even put up a fight. I don't know what you're talking about." "Huh, whatever. So what do we do next?" Brandon pondered for a while, until he realized he had yet to check the map. Click! As he opened the map, his eyes shot wide open. There was 3 minutes left until the convergence zone would close. And, Amy, I know, they were out of the safe zone. It was quite far too. Though he was quite reluctant about the idea, there was only one option if they wanted to make it to the safe zone as fast as possible. Whoosh! Hey! Brandon picked her up. "A princess, Carrie. Hold on tight. Put me down. Where are you planning on D? TSCZE. Belle had already left a while ago since she still had lectures to attend. The only ones left in the room were Evelyn and Vanessa. Of course, Evelyn had to stay since it was her class. But Vanessa, she had too much time on her hands. "How many students are left, Evelyn?" Evelyn peered down at a rectangular white device. On it displayed the timer and the amount of students left. 32:21 minutes left. Alive for 4. Makes sense. Most of the students teamed up, only to lose to the Locke and Ashfield pair and the Blackheart and Victoria pair. MHM, but it was smart. True, if they didn't, they wouldn't stand a fighting chance. There were some students with potential, though. Evelyn assessed some students who gave Brandon and Raven a difficult time, though there was no helping it when they were against a tri-elemental mage and the top student of the first years. She redirected her gaze to the screen. She could see Brandon panting heavily after fighting all the pairs that had teamed up. Switch! The screen switched to Raven Blackheart, who did the same. She once again shifted her gaze down to look at the device. Click! As she clicked on the map icon, she could see the locations of the two, and they're close by. In a few minutes, it seemed like the two pairs would soon run into each other. From outside the room, she could hear muffled voices of the students. Chatter and laughter reached Evelyn's ears from the other side of the room. But unexpectedly, another voice reached her ears. It was also muffled out. "Everyone, no gambling." The voice seemed to belong to Belle. Did they really just... They seemed to have placed their bets on whoever would win between Brandon and Raven. Surprisingly, Evelyn was interested as well. The fight she had been waiting for. Raven, the top student of the first year, and Brandon, the student she deemed worthy to be her protege. It's not that she discriminated against Raven being a duelist. It was because she knew next to nothing about bladed weapons. Raven would be a waste on her. She once again redirected her attention back to the screen. She pursed her lips to mutter, "It's starting. Huh. How much time do we have left? 29 minutes. The two heavily panted, trying to grasp for air as they continued forward. They had already left the tundra biome after the timer reached the 2-hour mark. But while they did, they were ambushed by a group of parties that had teamed up. No, not a group. It was a battalion. Brandon realized that the students plotted to team up right before the battle royale started. After interrogating a student, he found out that they had targeted whichever team had Raven, Amy, and Claire. It made sense to not include him since he was quite irrelevant at the moment. But after this is all over, all of the attention would be on him. Brandon Locke, the tri-elemental mage. Just thinking about it drained Brandon, but there was no helping it. It was the result of his inexperience. Despite reading all those books, the application of all the knowledge was still too hard for him, especially when it wasn't a one-on-one fight, but an ambush. Regardless, he was somewhat able to apply the knowledge to a certain degree, evident by his newfound swordsmanship. Hopefully I can test out the skill on Raven. The whole time, he had never used accelerated cognition. Since there was a cooldown, he planned to save it for when he'd finally fight Raven. Rustle, rustle. His attention was then caught by the rustling of the bushes a few distance from him and Amy. Two figures emerged from the bushes. Brandon scanned their figures, only to realize it was none other than Raven and Claire. The two seemed to have not noticed Brandon and Amy yet as they engaged in conversation. No, they were arguing. Their voices reached Brandon's ears. Huh, huh, this is why we should have hid, Claire. Huh, huh, don't blame me. I didn't know all of them would team up against us. I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying the situation could have been avoided. They seemed tired as well, gasping for air. They continued forward, only until they realized Brandon and Amy were in front of them a few distance away. They paused. Brandon. Hey. Brandon waved at him with a smile on his face. He was tired as well, but it seemed like Raven was even more tired than him. Should I go for it? As if his mind was read, Amy leaned in to whisper, "This is our chance." It seemed like she had the same idea as Brandon. However, as they turned to look at the two, Raven and Claire had already disappeared. "Behind you, Amy." Whoosh! Brandon dashed back as Amy did the same. Raven appeared behind Amy, or rather, her shadow. Shadow step, huh? Brandon breathed out a sigh of relief as Amy was able to react fast enough to dodge. But if Raven was targeting Amy, then TSZZ. In an instant, Claire blinked in front of him. Crackle. Clank dash. Her rapier thrusted forward. But Brandon was quick enough to react and conjured an ice shell to block it. Claire's eyes shot wide open. What? Ice? Raven was taken aback too and took a quick pause. Brandon, you're a deviant. Who knows? Brandon shrugged. It was finally time. He'd saved it just for this moment. Accelerated cognition. At that moment, the gears in his head started turning. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. The colors suddenly drained. Emotions were drowned out. Senses heightened to the maximum. He could see it all. Every move, no matter how fast. As if he was in complete control. Nothing escaped his line of sight. Millions of thoughts flooded Brandon's mind. For every move he'd planned on making, a scenario of what would happen played out, all in a split second. As I thought, this skill is broken. This was the first time he had used accelerated cognition in a real fight. He'd only used it when he was studying, trying to assess the skill. After each experiment, he found out the skill had a drawback. When the effects were over, his head started to throb, and he felt like he was having a mental fatigue. An excruciating migraine then occurred. Excruciating enough that he found himself banging his head, trying to mitigate the pain. After each experiment, he found out that 5 minutes was the sweet spot. And to his surprise, the cooldown would shorten to 5 hours instead of 10. Thus, he had to end the entire thing in 5 minutes. Why did he hide his abilities? Clenching her rapier tightly, Claire focused all her attention on Brandon. Several questions flooded her mind, but now was not the time. At first, she was confident she could beat Brandon. She thought he shared the same affinity as her, thus thinking she could handle him. Unlike Raven, Claire had never seen Brandon as a threat. After all, he was way below the rankings. How could he be a threat? She never understood why Raven was wary of him. And to her surprise, Amy started paying attention to him the past few weeks. Just what was so special about him? His attitude rubbed her the wrong way. The way he spoke to her, as if he was her equal. No, not just her, but to everyone in the group. It peeved her so that someone with such a low ranking had joined their friend group. In her own terms, why is this insignificant nobody hanging out with the cool kids? But she put up with him since he'd already cemented himself in the group anyway. She pretended to like him, but it might have been obvious to Brandon with the way she spoke to him. But now, things were different. She clenched her teeth. So he was a deviant this whole time. Then why did he hide it? Claire stifled a laugh. Ridiculous. The person she had looked down on was way more talented than her than she thought. She gripped her rapier tightly. She couldn't accept the fact that Brandon was actually a deviant the whole time. It really rubbed her the wrong way. Step. It was then when Brandon strode forward. Claire kept her guard up and scanned his entire figure. What caught her attention was Brandon's eyes. They were shot wide open, but his expression, they were blank. His mouth was a closed slit. Step. He continued to walk forward. Each step exuded confidence. Yet at the same time, it seemed like his guard was down. But it was then when Claire could instinctively feel it. Brandon had no openings. Not going to move? I don't want to waste any time, so I'll take the initiative. Aroga. TSZZ. Brandon instantly disappeared, leaving trails of blue sparks. Claire thrusted her rapier forward, but when Brandon reappeared, he had already leaned sideways and dodged it. Swoo! She tried to swing her rapier horizontally, but before she could, it was abruptly put to a stop by Brandon's hand. Crackle! Ice started to protrude from his hand, crawling up all the way to Claire's rapier. Fuck! Claire jumped back, leaving her rapier. TSZZZ. As soon as she landed, she immediately flashed forward to kick Brandon, leaving trails of purple sparks. However, thud! Before she reappeared, Brandon's hand had already prepared to defend against it, blocking her leg with his palm. Yet Brandon didn't stagger back, as he'd already conjured ice on the ground to mitigate the force. He could see everything. With the rapier on his hand, he tossed it up high. In a split moment that distracted Claire, Brandon once again blinked forward. Claire seemingly tried to dodge sideways, tried to increase her speed with lightning. However, mana disruption, nothing happened. Wah! Bang! Brandon's fist clad in lightning struck Claire right in the abdomen, hurling her away. Kahut! Claire spat out blood as she crashed into a tree. Giving her no time to recover, Brandon lifted his palm. Whoosh! A massive gust of wind left his palms as it blew Claire away, who was slumped down on a tree. The tree was pulled from its roots at the sheer force of the wind as it hurled away along with Claire. TSZZ. Brandon blinked forward once again to chase Claire, who was still propelled by the wind. But he abruptly stopped mid-flight. Yet again, he saw it coming. Clenching his hand to a fist, he cladded his entire arm with blue sparks and swung it horizontally behind him. Bang! The moment he did, Raven appeared behind him, only to be instantly struck on the cheek. Cool. Raven spat out blood as he staggered back. Raven rubbed his cheek and said, "How did you know?" Obvious. Huh. Before Raven could finish, Brandon disappeared, then reappeared and struck him with a lightning-cladded uppercut. Raven was sent hurling up high. Though Brandon was under the effects of accelerated cognition, he didn't actually need it to beat Raven. After all, Raven had a bad habit when fighting. He often appears from behind. TSZZZ. As Raven was still suspended in the air, Claire flashed forward and rejoined the fight, leaving trails of purple sparks. Too obvious. Before Claire could land a blow, Brandon had already conjured up an ice wall to block the incoming Claire. Clank! She crashed onto the wall. Brandon redirected his attention behind him. Predictable. Raven appeared behind Brandon's shadow, only to be abruptly stopped by a gust of wind that protruded from Brandon's back. Rag! Claire seemingly recovered her rapier and once again tried to strike Brandon. Too loud. He redirected the rapier's trajectory with a small push of his left palm. Crackle! With his left palm on the rapier, his right hand was lifted up and an ice sword materialized. Slash! At that moment, Claire was out of the battle royale session. She then dematerialized as white particles fluttered in the air. Brandon then turned to the side and grabbed hold of seemingly nothing. No. As he closed his grip, Raven had once again appeared behind him. However, his neck was immediately caught by Brandon. Brandon lifted him up, gripping on Raven's neck. Cool. One-sided. The fight was way too one-sided. All it took was 2 minutes to defeat Claire and Raven. Despite being the top 3 students of the academy, they were helpless against Brandon. It's not that Brandon could see the future, but with accelerated cognition, he could come up with a million counters to each and every move Raven and Claire would make. Truthfully, Raven was physically stronger than him. But during the entire fight, not once had he landed a hit on Brandon. With the ice sword on his hand, Brandon motioned to thrust it in Raven's chest. Swoo, W8. Be before you kill me. There's something you should know. Amy. She suddenly dematerialized. I didn't kill her. What? How could that be? Brandon tried to think of how something like that would happen. But despite being under the effects of accelerated cognition, he couldn't figure it out. How? Millions of theories flooded his mind in a second. But nothing. The only choice was for him to kill Raven, and then himself, so that they could go back to the real world. It was because he was unsure if they were the last pair standing. That was the only conclusion he'd come up with. Without any hesitation, he thrusted the sword on Raven's chest. Coop, I'll see you on the other S. Kiss easy. Raven then dematerialized. White particles fluttered from where his figure was. After Raven was gone, Brandon turned the sword around. The tip was directly facing where his heart was located. But before he could thrust, the world around him started turning into blocks of cube. It was desynchronizing. The vast expanse started condense rapidly. And before he knew it, his hand had started to turn into cubes as well. It slowly faded, crawling all the way to his body. The world started to turn dark. Did I win? He then desynchronized. Something about him is different. Evelyn's eyes were peeled to the screen as she thoroughly scanned Brandon's figure. Ever since the fight started, Brandon felt like a different person. His eyes, his pupils weren't moving, as if it was fixed in place. His expression was blank, yet his eyes were wide open. He walked forward indifferently, as if he could see everything. But he's just staring at nothing. Yet for some reason, Evelyn couldn't find any openings. Glancing to her side, Vanessa's mouth was left agape. She too was surprised. The two did not exchange any words, but they both knew they had the same question. What kind of magic is that? Evelyn couldn't see any lingering traces of mana. Unsure, she couldn't tell what kind of affinity Brandon was using. Not gonna move? His voice. It felt monotonous, as if he was detached from reality. In that instant, Brandon had already flashed forward. Yet when he reappeared, he was already leaning sideways, instantly dodging Claire's rapier before she even thrusted it. How did he? As if he saw it coming even before he flashed towards Claire. From beside her, Vanessa's voice reached Evelyn's ears. Do you think he could beat us? I don't know. He's way beyond expectations. Evelyn could tell that Brandon was way weaker than her. Yet for someone with as much experience as her, she couldn't find any openings. Wasn't he struggling in his first fight with a group of mages? He had also put in a lot of effort just to survive the ambushes from the other mages that formed a team. But right now, this moment, Brandon was in a whole different league, as if something inside him switched. An alter ego? Or was it a trump card he was saving? She breathed out a heavy sigh. She realized she could get her answers once Brandon becomes her protege. Yes, she would do anything to get Brandon on her side. Knock, knock. Someone knocked on the door. Again, but since Evelyn was quite introverted, it was Vanessa who entertained the new guest. Who is it? From behind the door, a muffled voice reached her ears, a man's voice. It's Professor Darwin. May I come in? Who? Who's Professor Darwin? Vanessa stood up and glanced at Evelyn. She pursed her lips to say, it's the previous combat class instructor, the one you replaced. I see. I've never really asked, but why did I take his job? Oh, right. Where do I start? But before Vanessa continued, she walked towards the door and opened it. The door creaked open and a middle-aged man with blue hair emerged. His hair was disheveled, and there were visible bags under his eyes. What do you need, Professor Darwin? I just want to see some of my students before I leave the academy. Leave? Why was he planning on leaving? Darwin then switched her gaze towards Evelyn. Hello there. Are you Evelyn Cessna? Yes, that would be me. We've finally met. I'd like to thank you for looking out for my students. The man seemed gentle as he stifled a laugh. Evelyn felt bad. Darwin seemed to be troubled with circumstances that didn't allow him to stay as a professor. Yes, it's the least I could do. Is it okay if I take a look at my students one last time? It was then when something peeved Evelyn. Something was off about Darwin. but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Regardless, the least she could do was allow him to bid his farewells to his former students. Yes, you can take the shift porter right there. It'll take you below this room. She then pointed towards a white circular device that was planted on the ground by the corner. Thank you. Darwin continued to walk forward as he stepped inside the shift porter. Whoosh! As Darwin disappeared, Evelyn turned toward Vanessa. So, what were his circumstances? Before her question was answered, Vanessa turned to sit back on the circular couch. Vanessa then locked her gaze with Evelyn. Her expressions were serious. You've seen the news, right? News? The one about the Osborne heir's murder. Ah, that. Of course she'd seen it. When it first made headlines, everyone was talking about it. Articles filled the internet with theories on who the murderer could be and the crime's motive. Evelyn was interested as well, but it wasn't her job to find the perpetrator. Vanessa then continued. You see, Darwin is actually Felix Osborne's cousin. His full name is Darwin Osborne. Now it all made sense. Evelyn stayed silent as she listened to Vanessa. After the death of Felix, all the Osbornes who operated separately from the company were called upon. They put in all their resources to find the perpetrator, which is why Darwin had to leave the academy. But it seemed like he was a sentimental man as he returned to the academy one last time just to bid farewell to his students. But as they continued their discussion, a certain voice grabbed their attention. It was Raven's. Amy. They then switched their gaze at Amy, who seemed to be desynchronizing. What's happening? I didn't die. So why am I disappearing? Evelyn and Vanessa abruptly stood up and headed for the window. As the two peered down, what met their line of sight was Darwin, who was carrying an unconscious Amy. Whoosh! A portal materialized. There was no time to waste as Evelyn tried to conjure up mana to break the window. But she could feel no mana. Nothing happened. What? She'd seen this happen a few times when she was working for the guild. There was only one answer. Mana seals. She'd concluded that Darwin must have set up a mana seal before he entered the room. The shift porter wouldn't work as the entire room was absent of any lingering traces of mana. She then turned towards Vanessa, who seemed to not comprehend the situation. Let's go. Only this room's mana is sealed. We can still save her if we leave this room. Vanessa immediately nodded, and the two quickly bolted out of the room. As they made their way outside, Vanessa shifted the weight of the floor. See our crack. The ground shook intensely as cracks started to form. Boom! The crack widened, opening a gaping hole, and they fell down to the first floor. Slam! But when they arrived inside the virtual simulation room, Darwin had already disappeared. The deed had been done. The realization dawned upon them. Amy was kidnapped. Puff! Puffing on a cigarette, a man with gray hair and black eyes stood by the window, peering down at the city. He turned around and glanced at his desk. On it were a bunch of papers roughly piled up. No, it was a mess. He then approached it and flipped one of the papers. His eyes narrowed. The death of the Osborne heir. Felix Osborne, a gruesome murder. Masked killer on the loose. Osborne Company stocks dropped to a new low at the murder of their heir. Tisk! The man clicked his tongue. Useless humans. He grumbled to himself, but only stopped as he took a drag for another puff. Puff! This man was none other than Francis Osborne, CEO of Osborne Company, and the father of Felix Osborne, and a Wraith cultist. Wraith cultists were a group of humans that directly worshipped the Wraiths. There were different groups of Wraith cultists, but they all had one goal in mind: to successfully summon a full-fledged Wraith. But so far, no Wraith cult had ever managed to successfully summon one. Though a Wraith would soon corrupt a Wraithbound's body, the limitations of the human body was far too much of a handicap. In other words, the one controlling a Wraithbound's body was actually a Wraith, but their potential would be restricted, which is why they had to summon their real body. Wraiths typically feed on someone's emotions, particularly despair. If a human feels like they want to end it all, that's when the Wraiths would appear in their vision. In exchange for a pact, they would be granted power. But of course, they would omit the part where their bodies would soon become possessed. Truthfully, Francis Osborne was long gone. The one controlling his body was none other than a Wraith. And because of the death of his son, who would soon become a full-fledged wraithbound, he was quite peeved. No, he was furious. It would take 10 years just for a wraith to fully corrupt a wraithbound's body. The death of Felix pushed his plans quite far back. But there was one solution to this. Amy Ashfield. He'd done his research on her and found out that she was a top student in Astrea Academy. This meant that her mana capacity was significantly great. If she were to turn into a wraithbound, then the limitations of the wraith possessing her would drastically lessen. Since she was the only witness to the crime, she might have seen the perpetrator. Francis could find out who the perpetrator was and be able to replace Felix with Amy. She was the perfect candidate. Not only that, but he was informed by Darwin that the students would have their battle royale session today, meaning it was the perfect chance to kidnap Amy Ashfield. They had several targets as well, such as Belloc, but it would be far too difficult to defeat her, as she was always surrounded with exceptional mages. Puff! He took a drag again. He then dropped the cigarette and stepped on it against the ground. A sizzling sound echoed in the room. Tzz. As soon as he did that, he lumped down on his seat. BRT. BRT. From his pocket, he felt his phone buzzing. It seemed like someone was calling him. Click. The first one to speak was Francis, as he placed the phone near his ear. So, did you get her? I did. Good. Take her to the location I sent you. Understood. Click. As the call ended, Francis stood up and grabbed his coat that was hugging the back of his seat. He donned the coat and took a cigarette from a pack and a lighter from his pocket as he nibbled on the cigarette. Click, click, puff. After the incident, all the students were advised to stay at home for the time being. The winner would be announced after things settled down. But of course, Evelyn knew Brandon had won. All of the professors attended a meeting as Evelyn and Vanessa were the one to debrief them on what exactly happened. Some professors stayed quiet and listened, while some showed obvious disdain. How could they not? When a student of Astrea Academy, an academy for the elite, was kidnapped, the one to have spoken most of the time was Vanessa, since Evelyn didn't know how to put the situation into words. While no one pinned the blame on her, Evelyn thought otherwise. Yes, the only one who blamed Evelyn was none other than herself. It was her class, and Amy was one of her students. Yet she was kidnapped right under her nose. It was a huge blow to her reputation. She was distressed by what happened, but she didn't lose hope. Evelyn had several connections, being a member of the Waltz, one of the top guilds in the country. If she would request their assistance, then saving Amy was indeed possible. After the meeting was over, Evelyn roamed the halls. The sound of her heels clicking on the marbled floor echoed. Click, click, but she abruptly paused as two familiar figures entered her line of sight. It was Brandon Locke, and he seemed to be talking to his sister, Belloc. No, it seemed like they were arguing as their voices reached Evelyn's ears. Why did you hide the fact that you were a deviant? I didn't. Evelyn was curious as well, eavesdropping on the two siblings' conversation. But to her surprise, Brandon didn't continue the conversation as he walked ahead of his sister. Wait, where are you going? To find Amy. That's not your job. It kind of is. What Brandon said piqued Evelyn's curiosity. Why was it his job? They were partners, sure. But Amy's kidnapping had nothing to do with him. He shouldn't involve himself, as that was the police's duty. No, for Evelyn, it was her responsibility. For some reason, Brandon seemed to know something. Brandon continued to walk to the exit as Belle walked the other way. Brandon seemed like he knew just exactly where to go. This intrigued Evelyn even more. Does he know something? If she wanted to save Amy, then Brandon would be her only lead. Since he was now alone, it was a good time to approach him. And she did just that as she called out for him. Brandon Locke. Brandon turned around and met her gaze. Miss Evelyn, what can I do for you? Come to my office. Entering her office, the room was clean, free from any speck of dust. It was finely furnished, as each furniture gave the room a symmetrical feel. Seated on her desk, Evelyn motioned for her bag and took out a specific item. It was a lollipop. Brandon tilted his head, puzzled. Why did she bring me here? Evelyn unwrapped the lollipop and gave it a lick before shoving it inside her mouth. Firstly, slurp. Congratulations on winning. So I did win in the end? Yes. Slurp, slurp. Second, become my assistant. Of course, there are incentives in doing so, such as being personally trained by me. She removed the lollipop and gave it a lick, then shoved it back in her mouth and continued. So, what will it be? Brandon was taken aback. He knew his performance during the battle royale was superb. Do know that I won't accept any refusal. But what he didn't expect was to catch the attention of someone like Evelyn. It was a good offer. Through Evelyn, he could get several references for Skill Weaver. And though his control over magic was proficient enough, he realized his control over mana was lackluster. Are you going to give me an answer? Or are you just going to continue staring at me? He had realized this when he would get easily exhausted whenever he used a skill. Not only that, but the way he used his skills was too by the book. Brandon, the way he used a skill was only as to how the system told him how to use it. Theory and application was way too different, and Brandon knew that. The only way he could improve was if there was someone who could teach him. Slurp, slurp. However, now was not the time for this kind of conversation. Amy was in danger, and he didn't quite know where she was being held. The only way to get a lead on her location was to head for the Osborne Company building. I'm quite uncomfortable with how you're looking at me. But it was then when an idea flashed in his mind. That's it, Hume. As he locked his gaze on Evelyn, she was leaning down and hiding her face. Brandon tilted his head. Miss Evelyn, I don't like it when people stare at me for too long. He never realized that he was so lost in his thoughts that he was staring at Evelyn for exactly 4 minutes. Oh, sorry. It's okay. So what's your answer? I accept. Great. We'll meet up on 2 conditions. 1, help me save Amy. Evelyn tilted her head as she continued to lick the lollipop. Do you know where she is? I have a rough idea. How do you know? 2, no questions asked. Is that any way to speak to your professor? No. Questions asked. She furrowed her brow. At the end of it, they both came to an agreement. Brandon would become her protege, as long as she never questioned whatever he did. As Brandon left the office, he approached a corner and breathed out a heavy sigh. Quests. Save Amy Ashfield. Rewards. EXP. Plus 300. Stat points. Plus 5. System coins. Plus 100. Penalty. Due to the sheer difficulty, no penalty shall be enacted upon the user. Whom? Amy was jolted awake, only to realize that she couldn't move. Clang. Clang. Every time she moved a limb, a clanging sound would echo. She glanced down to trace the source of the sound. But to her surprise, it was dark. What? She had realized something was wrong. At that moment, she started to panic. She couldn't move as if she was bound to something. No, the clanging sound had given her a hint that she was indeed bound by chains. By instinct, she tried to conjure up mana to break free from the chains. However, nothing happened. She couldn't feel any mana at all. Once again, panic started to rise within her. Drip, drip. Cold sweat protruded from her forehead and dripped down the side of her cheek. The last thing she had remembered was fighting Raven inside the virtual simulation. But in the middle of the fight, her vision suddenly turned dark. How'd I end up here? She continued to panic. Was it a prank? It had to be. She had never imagined that she would find herself in a situation like this. Brandon, Claire, Rachel, this isn't funny, but it seemed less likely for Claire and Rachel to do this. Brandon, please. Yet there was no response. Each of her screams reverberated the room. At that, she realized that the room was quite spacious. Someone, please. Her eyes started to strain. No, she could feel a wet sensation dripping down. Of course, she knew Brandon wouldn't do such a thing. She was just trying to ease herself. She knew the situation she was in was dire. Mana shackles weren't really an artifact that was released to the public. Usually, the ones who had them would be the police, the government, or someone important. She had concluded that someone who did this to her was the latter. But who? She had never crossed anyone, nor tried to get on their bad side. Besides Brandon. But he was a different case. In the first place, Brandon wouldn't be able to do this since he was in the virtual simulation with her. Wait, she realized once again. What if it was Moriarty? Once again, panic started to rise within her. Clang, clang. Her hands started to tremble, and so did her legs. She could feel that her arms were stretched wide apart, seemingly pulled by the chains. Yet she couldn't see anything at all. Sob, sob, flick. But at that moment, a flicking sound echoed, and light had finally entered her vision. But due to the shift from darkness to light, it was quite overwhelming as she turned to the side and closed her eyes. It was then when an eerie voice reached her ears, a baritone, a man's voice. "I see you've woken up." Amy gradually opened her eyes and traced the source of the voice. A figure stood not far from her, a man with blue hair and black eyes. Though she had never seen the man before, he looked quite familiar. She just couldn't put a finger on it. Step. The man walked towards her. Clang, clang, clang. At that, Amy started to panic again. She trembled, and the chains continued to echo a clanging sound. Her tears continued to flow down her cheek as she feared for what was next to come. Her head turned sideways as she closed her eyes, continuing to shake. Please don't kill me." "I won't." The voice reached her. It was close. She realized the man was already a few inches from her. The man leaned closer to whisper in her ear, "As long as you cooperate." What does he want from me? Of all people, why me? I've never done anything wrong. Why am I the only one here? Someone save me. These kinds of thoughts piled up in her head, but she knew it was futile. There was no one there to save her. She didn't even know where she was. So how could other people find her? Scanning the room, her hunch was correct, and the room was quite spacious. From what she could see, she had concluded that she was inside a room. To her right was a window that was sealed off by blinders. To her left was nothing. The room was painted entirely white for some reason. It's 1 a.m. She then noticed that there were chains protruding from the wall, clinging onto her. The dark purple color of the chain confirmed her suspicions that it was indeed manacles. The man then walked towards the window. He lifted up the blinders, and it was then Amy realized where she was, or what kind of place it was. The room seemed to be situated high up, as she could see the rooftops of several buildings. And it was already dark. So how long was she out? From what she remembered, the battle royale would last for 5 hours. It started at 2 p.m., which meant the whole session would end at 6 p.m. The countdown on the timer she had last remembered was 29 minutes left, which meant that before she was left unconscious, it should have been 5:31 p.m. It was already dark. As if her thoughts were seemingly read, the man shifted his gaze from the window to her and spoke up. Was asking for Evelyn's help the right decision? Brandon was unconfident if he could actually save Amy by himself. After all, he knew that Francis Osborne was a full-fledged Wraithbound. Due to the details of the quest, he had concluded that the current task was unlike anything he had ever dealt with. It was the first time he would be significantly rewarded, and to his surprise, there was no penalty, just like the time with Alpha. He could recall the time he fought Alpha, how helpless he was against him. Due to his abilities at that time, the system deemed him too weak to actually finish the quest. And now the same thing has happened. Despite having all the skills within his arsenal, the system deemed him too weak to finish the current task. This meant that if he wanted to save Amy, he needed assistance. There were several others he could ask for help, such as Raven, Claire, Reinhard, and Rachel. But he had already changed the plotline enough. He didn't want to involve any of the main cast anymore, though it seemed like Evelyn wanted to win his trust for some reason as she accepted his conditions. It was quite the proposal. After all, from what he remembered from the novel, Evelyn would soon surpass the current top mage. But once again, there was no point in relying on his knowledge about it. The plot had significantly changed, emphasis on significant. After I killed Felix, it wasn't the same story anymore. He had drastically changed the entire thing. His knowledge about the future was useless. Ring, ring, ring. Tisk. He clicked his tongue. Why isn't he answering? For the past few minutes, he had been trying to call Alpha, but it was to no avail. Of all times, fuck. It seemed like Alpha wasn't answering his phone. It was the first time this had ever happened and left Brandon frustrated. But he had to compartmentalize it for now. If Alpha was busy with whatever primordial task he had, then it was understandable. He took calm, steady breaths. She started trembling once again. 8 hours had already passed since then, yet no one had found her yet. The realization dawned upon her. Sob, sob. There was no one to save her. There was no one looking for her. She was all alone. It was unfair. She had never done anything wrong. She relentlessly kept her grades up. She meticulously kept her performance up. She was also one of the top 5 students within the first years. Yet all of this happened anyway. Why? Why me? Sob, sob. Unfair. What was even the point of doing all that? She should have spent her last days with her mother and sister instead. The man's voice reached her once again. Tell me, who killed my son? What was he talking about? Was he blaming her? She had never killed anyone. I know you're the only witness. It would have been impossible for you to make it inside the alleyway if you weren't following someone. What? Alleyway? It was then when she realized. Scanning his figure, he really was indeed familiar. This man was Felix Osborne's father. She'd seen him a couple of times in the news, especially when he was interviewed after his son's death. Tell me, who killed my son? I don't know. Lies. She knew, but at the same time she didn't. She never knew the identity of Moriarty. The only lead she gave to the police was that there was a man with a mask, a white mask. So this entire thing was because she was there that night. She was kidnapped because she was the only witness. Because she had followed Brandon that night. So is all of it Brandon's fault? No. In the first place, it was her own initiative to follow Brandon. She couldn't just throw him under the bus like that. But there was another person. The perpetrator, Moriarty. If I tell you, will you let me go? Of course he wouldn't. She knew that. She had to try anyway. That depends. The man motioned to sit down on a sofa, facing directly at Amy. I don't know his real name, but that's fine. Just tell me what you know. Should I tell him? Of course she had to. This was a matter of life and death. In the first place, this was all Moriarty's fault. She just happened to be there in the wrong place at the wrong time. But conflicted. If there was someone that should save her, then it should be Moriarty. Not that he should, but she wanted it to be him. But regardless, she had to answer the man. Or else, she would die. She glanced up and met the man's cold black eyes. Drip, drip. She pursed her lips as tears continued to flow down her cheek. On that night, gathering his thoughts together, Brandon beckoned outside. What met his sight was Evelyn with a lollipop in her mouth and was seated behind a black motorcycle. Here, he tossed a black helmet towards her, and Evelyn clumsily caught it. The motorcycle was recently bought, only after he had read on how to operate one. He then strode towards it and sat at the front. Virum. As he turned it on, Evelyn, who was seated behind, anxiously chimed in. You sure you know how to drive this thing? I've read books. That's not very reassuring. Trust me. Do you have a license? No. After breathing out a sigh, Evelyn donned the black helmet which covered her entire face. Brandon did the same, putting on his own black helmet. In truth, they were outside a store that sold helmets. He had just recently bought them as well. From behind him, Evelyn's anxious voice reached his ears again. I'm starting to doubt my decisions. No time for that. Hold on tight. At his instructions, Evelyn held the back of the motorcycle. Brandon just shrugged. It seemed like Evelyn didn't want to wrap her arms around her student. Vroom. Oh, due to the speed that Brandon was going, Evelyn seemed like she was about to fall off. Cum. She then wrapped her arms around his back. Brandon could feel something round and soft poking behind his back, but he didn't care and continued to speed up. Their destination was Osborne Company Building. Brandon knew it would be way too obvious for them to be there. But regardless, this was their only lead. If they wanted to save Amy as soon as possible, they had to go there and deal with whatever trap Francis Osborne was planning, or particularly the wraith possessing him. Vroom! Step, step! Raven walked urgent steps as he headed inside a particular room. The hallway was quite spacious, each row painted with a tinge of white and blue. On the wall were portraits of Special Force officers who have made a significant contribution to the task force. But Raven did not spare it any glance. He had seen it several times whenever he went to the Special Force building. He continued to walk urgently until he reached the door. Slam! As he entered the room, what met his sight were 5 figures, all adorning blue technical uniforms. On their chest, etched a gold symbol. The Special Force logo. One of them stood by the wall with his arms crossed. Red hair and blue eyes, Clint Stormfall, a fellow member of the Special Force. Seated on the left was a woman, with pink hair and black eyes, Francine Scott. Seated beside her was yet another woman, Alexandra Mehta, with brown hair and blue eyes. To the front was a man, with blonde hair and green eyes, Drake Leonard. And in the middle of it all was their leader, with pale wheat hair and dark eyes, Reyna Ataraxia. Reyna was also the woman that was in the call with Raven inside the police station. The entire group exuded an aura of sheer confidence. Each and every one of them had the pride of the Special Force behind their back. Reyna stood tall, her pale wheat hair cascading around her shoulders, which highlighted her proportional features. The technical uniform wrapped tightly around her, accentuated most of her curves. Her seductive allure was enough to even take Raven aback. But regardless, this was their leader, and he had to show the proper courtesy. The first one to have broken the silence was none other than Reyna. Raven immediately caught their attention when he entered the room, as Reyna lifted her head and locked her eyes with him. "Ah, Shirley, you're finally here." "Yes, but can you stop calling me Shirley?" "Why? Are you embarrassed?" She flashed him a sly smirk. "No." At that, Reyna contoured her smirk into a serious expression. "So, what's all of this about? I know we weren't tasked to do it, but please help me save my classmate." Truth be told, Raven had never given it his all in the fight with Brandon. At least, that's what he thinks. After Amy seemingly desynchronized, Raven was instantly alerted. Hence, why he headed directly to Brandon. But when he appeared from behind Brandon using Shadow Step, Brandon instantly attacked him. But the mere fact that Brandon was able to see him coming made him feel unease. No, it triggered his instincts to fight him. Thus, he continued to use Shadow Step to confirm if Brandon could actually see him coming. Again and again, and to his surprise, he was countered by Brandon every time he did so. At the end of it, he was snapped out of his thoughts as he informed Brandon about Amy's sudden disappearance, allowing Brandon to kill him. Right after the Battle Royale, they were instantly debriefed by Vanessa and Evelyn about what exactly happened to Amy. And right after they were dismissed, Raven sent an urgent call to Reyna to quickly gather the members. Due to his mental capabilities, he had already deduced what exactly happened during the kidnapping. Though it was mere speculation, there were no other suspects. After all, the kidnapper was an Osborn, and it seemed like the kidnapper specifically targeted Amy. Since he was one of the people that knew how Amy was involved in the crime, all he had to do was put 2 on 2 together to come up with a conclusion. After debriefing the team, their next course of action was to head into the Osborn Company building. Of course, he knew it would be way too obvious if they were actually there. But then again, it was their only lead. As the group were now leaving the room, Raven followed suit. However, Reyna turned around to look at him and spoke with a serious tone. "Surely you're staying." "What? You're not a real member yet, and this operation would be too dangerous for you." Raven knew that, though quite unsure of what kind of dangers lay ahead of the operation. But he couldn't just sit still and let the Special Force handle everything. "I'm going." "No. If you'll stop me, I'll go regardless of the consequences." Raven locked determined eyes with Reyna and continued. "She's a friend. She must be all alone and scared. You think I'll just stand down while my friend is kidnapped?" Reyna seemed taken aback. Raven knew this was the first time he was being impulsive, but he couldn't help it. He would do anything for a friend. But to his relief, Reyna breathed out a sigh and reluctantly nodded. Fine, but you must follow all my orders. If I tell you to retreat, you will do as I say." Raven instantly fixed his posture, back straightened, and lifted his arm to flash her a salute. "Understood." Reyna immediately gave him a nod. "Good.